Chapter 3641 Continuous Good Fortune. Customers came and went in the mall, but no one remembered this little soldier. They didn't know that he knew nothing about cultivation before last night. Now, when he reappeared, the soldier had not only stepped onto the path of cultivation, but he was also overflowing with demonic chi. It was not that the soldiers cultivated demonic techniques, but that they had killed and absorbed too many demonic creatures, causing them to be unable to be refined in a short time. The devil chi accumulated and overflowed, making him look more like a devil than a devil. This was definitely not a good thing. It would bring great hidden dangers to the soldiers, and it would not take long for them to become real monsters. This was the horror of the demonic energy. Countless demon hunters would eventually become evil demons because of the infection. However, the soldier did not know that. Instead, he felt that he was in a good state. He had killed too many demons that day and even occupied a demon nest. If it was in the past, the soldiers would not even dare to imagine such a thing. Who knew how many people would have to be sacrificed in order to clear out and occupy a fiend nest? But today, he only needed to single-handedly destroy a fiend nest. The soldier was extremely excited. When he thought of his relatives who had died in the demonic tribulation, he immediately had an even greater dream. He wanted to have more power to kill higher-level monsters and avenge his dead relatives. Perhaps one day, he could really kill the Demon King and sell his demon bones at a high price. If that was the case, then his life would not be in vain. Compared to yesterday's trash, today's high-grade demon bones didn't attract the attention of cultivators. The world of Lusheng was a high-energy plane to begin with, so cultivator Lusheng had very high standards. The things that were treated as treasures in other worlds were nothing to him. It was for this reason that they were not tempted at all after seeing the demon bone. At the same time, some cultivators would specially purchase these kinds of bones for special needs. Without waiting for too long, a cultivator came to see the goods. It was the cultivator from Lu Cheng who had made the deal before. When the soldier saw the other party, his face was instantly filled with joy, and he quickly bowed to thank him. He also said that without his help, he would have turned into a skeleton. "You're welcome. This was just a normal transaction. It's mainly because of your amazing fortune." Looking at the soldiers who had changed so much in just one night, the cultivators of Lu Cheng were also amazed. The previous deal was done casually, and he did not expect the soldiers to have such an opportunity. It was indeed a little unexpected. However, your current state is indeed very dangerous. It's obvious that you have too much demonic chi. If I don't speed up the refining process, my life might be in danger. The soldier was shocked. He didn't want to become that kind of monster. He might as well commit suicide. "You're so kind. Can you tell me the way to solve the hidden danger? I'm willing to give these demon bones as a thank you gift." The demons could be killed, but the hidden danger had to be eliminated immediately. Otherwise, there would be no future for them. Seeing the soldier's sincere attitude, the cultivator chuckled. In the cultivation world, when one encountered similar guidance, the person seeking advice had to pay a corresponding price. The soldiers didn't understand the rules, but they were grateful, which made the cultivators very satisfied. In your case, you need to cultivate the corresponding cultivation method, and it's best to wear equipment to suppress demonic chi. Unfortunately, I don't have any of these two things on me. The soldier's heart skipped a beat, and his face was filled with anxiety. Then, what about xianxia? Cultivator Lu Cheng smiled and pointed to the ground. At any other time, we might be at a loss, or it might take a long time to solve the problem. However, in this mall, as long as you had a request, there should be nothing that couldn't be done. Besides, what you need is really nothing. After listening to cultivator Lu Cheng's explanation, the soldier's eyes lit up and he became eager to try. "If you trust me, then follow me around the mall. I'll help you find cultivation techniques and magic tools." The soldier was overjoyed and quickly expressed his agreement. The two of them strolled along the long street, entering the shops from time to inquire about the corresponding cultivation methods. After asking around, he found out that there were indeed cultivation techniques and magic tools. It was just that none of these cultivation techniques and magic tools were cheap, and the soldiers could not afford them at all. If he accumulated them for a period of time, he could try it out. Unfortunately, the soldiers were in danger and could not delay for too long, or they would likely lose their lives. The Lu Cheng cultivator did have some savings, but he also had things he needed to buy urgently. If he were to lend it to the soldiers, his own cultivation would be delayed. The two sides met by chance and did not know each other very well. Although the cultivators of Lusheng City sympathized with the soldiers' situation, they might not be generous. As both parties strolled around, they happened to come across a large shop opening and countless cultivators gathered nearby. After asking around, he found out that the original shop was in the cracked territory, which was the real operator of the shopping mall. In order to thank the customers of the mall, a lucky draw was held, and everyone could participate. Out of curiosity, the two of them participated according to the requirements and soon knew the results of the draw. Perhaps it was luck, or perhaps it was a behind-the-scenes operation, but the soldier actually got a reward of 10% off. If you buy 3 items in the shop, you will enjoy a 10% discount. Congratulations, brother. Your luck is really good. Hearing the congratulations from the cultivators of Lucheng, the soldier came back to his senses and trembled with excitement. He was originally on the verge of despair, but he did not expect to come back from the dead end and encounter such a good thing. The soldiers entered the spacious store excitedly to pick out the cultivation techniques and magic weapons they needed. Although it was said to be a 10% discount, because the original price was too high, the 10% discount was not cheap either. The poor soldier still could not afford a single piece. Fortunately, his fellow Lucheng cultivators finally decided to help him in his time of need and were willing to lend him a sum of starting capital. If he missed this opportunity, it would be such a pity and he would definitely regret it. What the cultivators of Lucheng did was also an investment. Most cultivators would always remember those who sent charcoal in the snow. After a series of choices, the soldier finally bought the item he wanted. It was as if a set of cultivation techniques had been specially tailored for him. Although the grade was not high, it won in the fact that the attributes were highly compatible. It was a Dharma artifact that could dissolve and suppress demonic chi. It was wrapped around his waist like a belt and had a pretty good defense. The last item was a long, black blade. It was of a higher grade than the weapon he had used before. In just one night, the soldiers had changed their weapons, and their strength and safety had also increased several times. After returning to the shop, the soldier gave all the demon bones to the cultivators in Lucheng as he had promised. He also said that he would continue to hunt monsters and obtain higher-level demon bones to pay off his debt. In the following time, the soldier used the special cultivation environment in the Shang city to study the cultivation technique he had just obtained. Before he knew it, a new day had arrived. The soldiers were forcefully sent out of the mall, which was also limited by the rules. If they wanted to stay for a long time, they had to pay extra. The soldier knew that the mall was suitable for cultivation, and the mall was naturally clear that it was a benefit for customers to stay for a short period of time, but if they stayed for a long time to cultivate, they had to pay. Such an approach was reasonable. After all, even if one had the money, one might not be able to enter such a blessed land. After a night's hard cultivation, the overflowing demonic chi had disappeared. The soldier was like a treasure blade with a restrained brilliance, which would kill once it was unsheathed. Chapter 3642, Vigilance from the Sorcerer World 1. As an existence with spiritual intelligence, the mall could operate on its own and did not need Tang Zhen to worry at all. In terms of business, he was definitely an expert. During the supervision process, Tang Zhen would also use his highest authority to do some behind-the-scenes operations. For example, during a lucky draw, a small cultivator who was in desperate need of cultivation techniques could get a 10% discount on the purchase of goods. This was just a casual act, and there was no purpose at all. After doing it, he no longer remembered it. However, in the unseen world, a trace of good karma would be formed. Perhaps from today onwards, the mall would have an irreplaceable position in his heart. Once they grew up and had the power to control the world, they would bring more benefits to the mall and the world of Lusheng. Everything was difficult at the beginning. Tang Zhen had already made preparations and was ready to deal with all kinds of changes that might happen at any time. Fortunately, everything had been running normally so far, and no accidents had happened. However, even so, Tang Zhen still maintained his vigilance and did not dare to lower his guard. At this moment, countless eyes were focused on him. After all, this was the first time something like this had happened in the world of Lusheng. As the saying goes, the more concerned one is, the more chaotic one will be. With Tang Zhen personally overseeing the situation and the supervision of many cornerstone platforms, who would dare to take the opportunity to cause trouble? This included the enemies who were spying on them in the dark. They similarly did not dare to act rashly. No matter how much they hated Tang Zhen, they would not jump out and cause trouble at this time. Unless the other party had gone completely crazy and wanted to be wanted by the cornerstone platform. There was not much problem with the Lusheng world, but the cultivators from the greater world still needed to be vigilant. Although the lower planes made up the majority, there were also high-energy planes, including competitors who were equally powerful. He wondered if there were any spies from the Myriad World Mall among the crowd. Would they be impressed when they saw the counterfeit version of the Super Mall? At the top of a 1,000-foot-tall building, a cultivator looked down at the stream of people that was like a surging river. The mall's environment was simple. There were no complicated terrain structures, and it was dizzying to look up, down, left, and right. There was only one long street that was 1,000 feet long. On both sides of the long street were tall buildings that stretched forward endlessly. This was convenient for the merchants and also for the customers. If one did not want to trade, they could fly to the top of the high-rise buildings. There was a special viewing platform here, where they could see the vast plains on both sides of the street. He would be at the top of the mountain, and the beautiful scenery would enter his eyes. On the boundless plains on both sides, there were countless behemoths swimming, many of which were comparable to gods. There were giant beasts of fortune and misfortune, 4 symbols and 10 beasts, as well as spiritual plants and builder trees. Their sizes were heaven-piercing. Many of them were existences that cultivators had only heard of, but had never seen with their own eyes. But now, it was like a raised animal, allowing the cultivators to look at it as they pleased, without any need to be afraid of giving pointers or evaluating it. If one was tired of seeing the strange scenery, they could also cultivate here in peace, allowing their strength to increase quickly and steadily. Cultivators who cultivated any cultivation technique could find an environment that suited them in the mall. Even if they couldn't find it, they could spend money to customize it. As long as there was enough money, there was nothing that couldn't be done in the mall. This was especially praiseworthy. Nowadays, many cultivators had decided to use the Shang City to cultivate and break through. It could avoid the inner demons and also resist the heavenly tribulation. It was simply the best life-saving method. Out of careful consideration, he even planned to hire a guardian to keep his justice safe. The longer they stayed, the more secrets they discovered, and from time to time, they would feel shocked and surprised. The tourist on the rooftop, who had changed into human skin and looked like a burly man, had already discovered many secrets. He didn't do anything else but look at the cultivators passing by Lu Cheng, counting the number and analyzing their strength. As time passed, the shock in his heart grew stronger. The cultivators wandering around the mall all had different strengths. Some were so weak that they were not worth mentioning, while some were so strong that they were unbelievable. It was natural for cultivators to be of varying strength, but the problem was that there were too many of them. With a simple calculation, in a short time, hundreds of millions of souls of cultivators in Lu Cheng had passed by his eyes. Due to the special rules of the mall, cultivators didn't feel crowded. They also didn't realize that countless cultivators were passing by them in an instant. Such a situation involved the rules of time. According to this frequency, there would be an astronomical number of cultivators in the city who would enter the mall every day. This was the most shocking part. Which cultivator organization had such a terrifying number of cultivators? The world of Lusheng is indeed not simple. The burly man muttered to himself, his eyes filled with fear. He also came from the outside world. Moreover, it was a place that Tang Zhen was familiar with. It was the wizard world of the past. It was a special plane world with many huge rings that revolved around the core origin. On these giant rings, there were countless countries, as well as uncountable knights and wizards. Just many years ago, the sorcerer world had once invaded the wilderness war zone, and the two sides had killed each other until blood flowed like a river. Back then, the wilderness war zone was too weak. When they were invaded by strong enemies, they were beaten to the point where they had almost no power to fight back. Those who fell behind would be beaten, especially in the cruel cultivation world. The weak and small battlefields were eventually destroyed. Tang Zhen took this opportunity to establish the sacred dragon war zone. Although the Magi did not participate in the war that happened that year, they knew the specific process of the battle. There was no real winner, so it could be considered a lose-lose situation. It was because he knew this that he was shocked by the power of the cultivators in Lusheng. If the sorcerer world had encountered a cultivator of this level when they invaded the Lusheng world, they would not have won. They might even have been invaded in reverse. The wizard had realized that he knew too little about the world of Lusheng. Now that he had the right opportunity, he had to get to know this powerful existence. With this thought in mind, the wizard slowly strolled around the mall, constantly observing and analyzing. He observed the cultivators in the building, the various products on sale, and the super mall itself. The more he looked at it, the more shocked and confused he became. Fear and respect also rose in his heart. I should let the other wizards come and see how powerful the world of Lusheng is, instead of being like a frog in a well. The wizard thought of this and immediately issued an order in the real world, asking them to find the welcoming token at all costs. At the same time, he also informed other magi of the same rank so that they would know the relevant information. The gate token from the world of Lusheng had appeared in the sorcerer world without any scruples. This matter itself needed to be taken seriously. Was it a deliberate provocation, a gesture of goodwill, or to achieve some unknown goal? In the face of the powerful world of Lusheng, the sorcerer world had to maintain a high level of vigilance, because once there was an oversight, it could lead to a fatal crisis. They did not have to wait long before figures with concealed auras appeared in the huge wizard tower where the wizards were. The masters of these figures were all top existences in the Magus world, equivalent to the level of gods. Of course, in the Magus world, they did not acknowledge the existence of gods. They thought that gods were just a kind of super creature. Powerful magi even often hunted down gods for their own training or for experiments. It might sound eerie, but it was actually not that scary. After all, similar things had happened in other plane worlds. I've invited all of you here to discuss a matter. Not long ago, I received a token that contains the power of laws. One thing was for sure, this was made by a true expert, whose strength far exceeded that of everyone present. Just before the message was sent out, I followed the guidance of the token and entered a very magical place. So that place is actually the world of Lusheng. Chapter 3643, The Sorcerer World's Response 1. Just as Tang Zhen had expected, the appearance of the receiving token in the Magus world had indeed caused quite a big commotion. The Sorcerer world naturally knew how powerful the world of Lusheng was, but they did not know much about it. The appearance of the Super Mall was equivalent to directly opening the door to the world of Lusheng, which was the best opportunity to collect information. However, it had to be strictly controlled. It was definitely not something that just anyone had the right to touch. Although there were no restrictions on the token itself, some people were not willing to accept it. The high and mighty wizard towers located in different ring zones continuously issued orders. Search the entire territory for the receiving token. No one is allowed to hide it. If someone disobeys the order, they will be severely punished. Wizards had all kinds of methods to make the punisher suffer a fate worse than death, so no one dared to violate the ban easily. They were also very determined to carry out their orders. With the order to collect them, even the beggars knew of the existence of the receiving token. They knew that it was something that the top Magus towers specially looked for and collected. It was unknown where it came from, but it had a magical ability. The appearance of the token of welcome was random. Whether it was in the mountains, rivers, lakes, or residential areas in the city, it was possible to find traces of this thing. One might not be able to find it if they searched for it deliberately, but it could appear in front of them if they were not careful. When you see the token, you must not touch it, but immediately report it to the wizard. There were even some places that would give generous rewards to encourage people to actively search for it. The punishment for the hidden ones was harsh without exception. The influence of the matter was getting wider and wider, and soon, similar search orders appeared in every circle of the Magus world. One by one, the receiving tokens were found from various channels, sealed tightly, and then sent to the wizard tower. Many people were implicated. Some were sent to prison, while others were directly killed. The incidents caused by the arrival tokens continued to break out in the Magus world, and more people were affected. Unknowingly, the situation had become more and more complicated. The secret of the welcoming token had been discovered and spread rapidly in private. It was only then that people realized that the token could connect to a super shopping center and allow them to contact countless cultivators from the other world. It was a holy land of cultivation. No matter what he needed, he could buy it at the super mall. He could also sell any item he had in the super mall. For cultivators, such a super shopping center was simply a holy paradise in their dreams. This was especially true for those cultivators who were suppressed and trying to resist. The token was a dream opportunity for them. By using the token to trade, one could accumulate enough capital to resist and become stronger and stronger. Perhaps one day, they would be able to overthrow the existing social class and establish a new harmonious order. Faced with such a temptation, how could the holder easily hand it over? It was also for this reason that the higher-ups of the Magus world were nervous, and spared no effort in collecting welcome tokens. This was because such an action was equivalent to planting a hidden mine in the sorcerer world, which could explode at any time and cause fatal damage. No cultivator organization could be united. There must be all kinds of darkness and differences within. The long-term stability was maintained because of the high-level cultivators, which ensured that chaos would not occur. The appearance of the token immediately became the source of the turmoil. It was also for this reason that some of the higher-ups in the sorcerer world thought that this matter was an investigation and provocation by the world of Lusheng. If possible, he had to crush it and try to counterattack. There were also wizards who disagreed. After visiting the super mall, they thought that things were not as complicated as they had imagined. The existence of the super mall was targeted at the greater world, including the sorcerer world. The supermarket was only a special channel to facilitate the cultivators' transactions. To the Magus world, this was a rare opportunity to obtain more cultivation resources. It would also be extremely beneficial to the improvement of one's strength. Nowadays, many Magus towers were condemning and reprimanding people righteously on the surface, forbidding anyone from using the receiving token. However, in private, they used the token to carry out all kinds of transactions. Even the advanced Magus Tower was like this, not to mention the private organizations. It could be said that such transactions were not stopped despite repeated prohibitions. The facts had already proven that there were no disadvantages to the deal. Instead, there were more and more benefits. As time passed, the ban on receiving and transporting tokens became more and more strict. The ruling class, who had obtained benefits, only wanted to obtain rich benefits for themselves, but they were not willing to be ruled by others. This was the only way to ensure the healthy continuation of their rule. However, the problem was that similar transactions could not be stopped. The individuals and organizations with the token became more and more low-key and secretive. There were even some organizations that went underground. In order to contain the development of the situation, the higher-ups of the sorcerer world made a plan to stop the cross-space-time connection between the arrival token and the super mall. Although it was a good idea, it was very difficult to do it. This was because the person who made the token was a God-King-level cultivator, an existence that even the top wizards had to look up to. The gap between their realms was too great, causing them to be completely helpless when facing the token. Fortunately, the Magus world had a deep foundation, and there were also ancestor-level magi who were comparable to cultivators at the God-King level. Magi of this level usually used special methods to fuse their bodies with powerful existences that were similar to ancient creatures. They existed within the laws and were almost immortal. They would not easily appear in the human world. After all, every time such a supreme existence revealed their true form, they would cause an incalculable amount of terrifying disasters. Although he could not reveal his true body, he could condense a consciousness embodiment and had a mysterious spokesperson. In the end, the matter of the receiving token still attracted the attention of these supreme existences. He had thought that these existences would be able to easily solve the problem, but the truth was not so. Tang Zhen was not only a divine king expert, but he was also skilled in runic magic formations. The welcoming token was personally refined by him, so it was not easy for him to study and crack it. Naturally, those supreme existences were helpless as well. This kind of thing could not be made public, or it would be equivalent to a slap in the face and damage the confidence of the Magi. The request for assistance had been submitted for a long time, but there was no result. This also led to various speculations among the cultivators. Of course, this kind of embarrassing thing could not be discussed in public. It could only be discussed in private. It was undeniable that the Magi's confidence had been affected. As time passed, the search for the restriction token never stopped, but the situation slowly changed. In private, wizard organizations and secret organizations were all entering the supermarket and conducting all kinds of transactions. Unlike cultivators from other worlds, wizards were very secretive in the supermarket. If it was not necessary, he would never reveal any information related to himself. Although many cultivators already knew that their business partners were from the Magus world, they still refused to admit their identity. Sometimes, when there was an accident and they met cultivators from the Magus world, they would also have a tacit understanding not to expose each other. Everyone took what they needed and did not disturb each other. As for those rules and prohibitions, they would always only limit the ordinary people and would never have any effect on the privileged class. The rules and prohibitions were like sharp swords in one's hands. They could only be used to kill and intimidate the enemy, but they could never be used to slash at oneself. Chapter 3644, The Secret Wizard's Destiny 1. The Sorcerer World, Ring 27, the region of the Netherworld constellation. In the Magus world, not only were the rings used to differentiate the territories, but the regions were also divided by the 360 constellations in the starry sky. These constellations surrounded the Sorcerer World and formed different regions, allowing people to determine their regions more accurately. As long as the residents of the area where the constellation was located looked at the sky at night, they could determine their belonging through the bright constellation. It was said that these ancient constellations represented the 360 supreme existences of the Sorcerer World, who would bless the creatures in the area illuminated by the starlight. At this moment, night had fallen, and the tired birds returned to their nests. The people who had been busy for the whole day all went to rest. Especially in the remote towns, the residents went to bed earlier. After all, they still had to work the next day. In the forest outside the town, a wispy figure was hidden in the darkness, as if he had already turned into smoke. If one did not observe carefully, it was impossible to discover its existence. After a while, a wild black cat appeared on the side of the road, its dark green eyes looking around. Soon, the wild cat arrived at the edge of the forest. It looked at the darkness and the figure in the darkness. Meow meow meow, the cat made a sound, with a hint of laziness. Let's go, the smoke-like figure said. Then, a green tunnel appeared in the dark forest. It was a type of glowing moss that was being lit up one by one, creating a beautiful scene. It was just that such a beautiful scene made people feel strange and eerie. The forest, which seemed normal during the day, would become extremely dangerous at night. The trees would eat people, and there were fatal traps everywhere. However, the townspeople knew nothing about this. The wildcat, who had received permission, quickly ran forward and stepped into the dimly lit passage. As the wildcat continued to move forward, the dim light tunnel quickly shrank, and the gloomy forest returned to darkness and silence. Before the light disappeared, the twisted trees could be seen, revealing sharp, ugly, and uneven teeth. It didn't take long before another strange bird flew over. The strange bird had a very terrifying appearance. Its upper body was that of an ugly woman with her bare chest exposed, while its lower body was that of two thick and ugly bird claws. The strange bird circled twice in the air and landed in front of the figure. It looked at the figure with its blood-red eyes. The figure in the dark nodded and didn't say anything. The dim light passage appeared again. The strange bird's figure flashed and it charged into the forest, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After a while, an old man with two goat legs, deer horns on his head, and fangs in his mouth walked over. He bowed to the figure in the dark and then walked into the dimly lit passage. In the following time, all kinds of strange things appeared in the forest. They followed the dim light and entered a small house in the forest. It looked like a dilapidated hut, but there was nothing inside when it was opened. However, if one entered through the dim light passage, they could see a glowing vortex in the house. After passing through the glowing vortex, one would enter an underground space and see a spacious hall supported by twisted tree roots. This underground hall was the trading market for secret magi. The beings that came through the shimmering light passage were all secret wizards, and their purpose was to carry out transactions. Not everything could be bought in the regular market, and the price was astonishingly expensive. Secret sorcerers were not officially registered, so they did not need to accept any missions, nor did they need to pay the fees to support an advanced sorcerer tower. There were also some secret wizards who had made serious mistakes and chose to hide their names in order to avoid punishment from the officials. The authorities had always been suppressing such secret wizards. Once they were caught, they would be severely punished. The officially registered magi also looked down on these secret magi, and they rarely interacted with each other. It was because of these reasons that the secret sorcerers were like rats on the street, and it was quite difficult for them to obtain cultivation resources. In the past few years, this situation had continued, and the secret wizards were in a difficult situation. After the appearance of the token, the situation finally turned around. A secret magus who had obtained a guide token would definitely not hand it over, unless his brain had been kicked by a behemoth. Handing over the token was equivalent to walking right into a trap. Not only would he not get any rewards, but he would also be sent to prison. In the beginning, the secret sorcerer only used it himself, afraid that others would find out. After a period of time, the secret sorcerer became more and more daring, and began to act as a middleman. They held secret meetings, accepted reservations from other secret wizards, and helped them find the training materials they wanted. Or, he could go on Taobao in the mall and get cheap and good items to sell to secret magi who needed them. The items collected by the secret wizards could also be sold in the secret meeting, and the holder of the token would bring them to the super mall. Following this pattern, the secret magi became stronger and stronger, and the scale of the secret meeting grew larger and larger. It was for this reason that the secret meeting was severely suppressed by the officials. The secret sorcerers were forced to change their positions from time to time, and their actions became more secretive. The tree root cave outside the town had been built by a secret wizard, and now it had become the location of the secret meeting. The secret magi who were notified through the secret symbol or other means would continuously rush into the secret meeting. The secret magi outside the forest were in charge of keeping watch and verification, while someone in the hall was in charge of maintaining order. A woman in a black robe stood behind the table and hosted the auction. The secret wizards all gave their bids. Ever since the appearance of the welcoming token, it became much easier for secret magi to obtain supplies, and they did not have to worry about going bankrupt just to buy a set of supplies. A wide variety of items and a fair price. This was the true evaluation of the super mall by the secret wizards. The biggest dream of many secret sorcerers was to be able to have a welcome token and personally enter the super mall. However, with the government's vigorous collection of tokens, they became increasingly rare. It was not easy to obtain them, and it was even more difficult to hold on to them. Now, a token of welcome was priceless. It represented a great opportunity, but it also meant great danger. Fights over the receiving token would occur from time to time. Too many secret magi had lost their lives in order to snatch this magical receiving token. The secret meeting was still going on, and the auction was still going on. One by one, items from different worlds were displayed, and they all had effects that surprised the secret sorcerers. The secret sorcerer now had more choices, and his own abilities had also been greatly improved, making it impossible for the enemy to figure out his background. Just as the auction was about to end, someone walked out of the cave behind them, carrying a large pile of wooden boxes. Under everyone's gaze, the figure with 6 arms holding the box suddenly laughed happily. Everyone's luck is pretty good, because our purchaser just packed up a batch of magic tools from our inventory. The name, magic weapon, was what the cultivators from the other world called it. It was equivalent to the props that everyone usually used. The product's quality has been tested and guaranteed to have no problems. Whether it's for normal use or for research and modification, it's a pretty good choice. While introducing the goods, the figure came to the table and put down a pile of wooden boxes. Now I'll show you the benefits of these magic tools, and then we'll start the auction. Listen to my advice, don't miss this opportunity, or you'll regret it. After hearing the introduction, the secret sorcerers' curiosity was piqued. They looked at the exquisite wooden boxes with anticipation. Soon, the first box was opened, revealing a cross-shaped magical artifact. It looked like 4 daggers pieced together. The man with the right arm picked it up, held it in his palm, and muttered something. In the blink of an eye, the magic weapon floated in the air and suddenly turned into dozens of swords, each of which was shining with a sharp cold light. Chapter 3645. The Secret Sorcerers, Worries 1. The secret sorcerers were secretly shocked by the 6-armed man's display because they had never seen such a weapon before. The attacking methods of wizards had always been dark and mysterious, mainly using curses and spells. There were also some wizards who were good at modifying their bodies and turning themselves into terrifying close combat monsters. No matter what kind of fighting style it was, they all had their own strengths. Although wizards also used tools, their styles were completely different from magic tools, which was why he was shocked when he first saw them. If they were in a life-and-death battle, there was a high chance that they would be seriously injured. After the shock and exclamation, a strong curiosity arose. The sorcerer's cultivation system was the best at exploring and researching the unknown. They always had an unspeakable curiosity. In order to satisfy their curiosity, they even dared to hunt down ancient gods and cut the captured gods into pieces. They even dared to mate with gods and produce all kinds of offspring. The cultivators from the other world who had dealt with the wizards all knew that once they attracted their interest, they had to be extra careful. This was because they would do anything to achieve their goals. It was also out of curiosity that they were willing to get what they wanted at all costs. The main reason why superstores were so irresistible in the wizard world was that they could satisfy the wizard's curiosity. In the Magus world, there had never been such a place, because knowledge was the most precious wealth. The appearance of the superstore was equivalent to opening the door to a whole new world for the wizards, especially for the secret wizards. Therefore, they were willing to pay any price, even if it meant risking their lives, to participate in such a secret gathering. As the magic tools were displayed one by one, the secret magi became more and more excited, and could not wait for the auction to begin. The host didn't waste any time and brought out the items for auction one by one. The magi who were interested in buying also started to bid. In a short time, all the magic tools in the box were sold, and both the buyer and the seller were very satisfied. After the deal was completed, the secret sorcerers left one after another, transforming into various forms. He could turn into a wild cat, a strange bird, or even a wild deer with white eyes. The purpose of doing this was to hide himself and at the same time, to be able to fight better. After the secret magi left, the underground cave used for trading was sealed up. A few secret sorcerers set up traps in the cave, which would be triggered once someone entered. Ordinary people would not be able to find this place, and those who could enter must be wizards. In order to prevent the secret from being exposed, it was normal to set up some defensive measures. After a period of time, the secret magi would return. If they were not exposed, they would remove the traps. Very quickly, a few figures appeared. After leaving the dense forest, they quickly headed into the distance. They walked for a few hours, and when dawn was about to break, they finally arrived at a swamp. After walking a few rounds in the wild grass, a wooden house appeared. Everyone entered the wooden house one by one. The last magus waved his hand, and wild grass began to grow wildly. The path in front of the wooden house was filled with wild grass that blocked the small wooden house. The wild grass around the wooden house, including the wild grass on the roof, was also growing wildly. In a short period of time, the small wooden house was completely hidden. It could not be seen from the distance or from the sky. The interior of the small wooden house was also a different world. It looked like the abdomen of a rotten beast, and it had a strange smell. It would wriggle from time to time. A secret magus wearing a cloak and a mask was sitting around a table. There were a total of 6 people, all of whom were the organizers of the secret gathering, and they shared a token of welcome. They had been moving like this all this time, changing locations after each shot. The purpose of this was to prevent being discovered by the wizard tower and then directly taken out. Although it was very hard to travel back and forth, if there was a generous reward, it was definitely worth it. The 6 secret sorcerers present all had the same experience. They had once been collectively expelled from a sorcerer tower. The reason was nothing more than being too poor, having too poor aptitude, or offending a descendant of a powerful noble. His heart was filled with resentment and unwillingness, but he was helpless. In the end, he could only choose to accept his fate. After leaving the wizard tower, the 6 of them helped each other and tried to continue their cultivation. It was just that the secret sorcerer's cultivation was difficult, far beyond the imagination of others, and they paid an unknown price to be able to barely persist. However, even if they put in 100 times more effort, their gains would not be even 1% of what a normal wizard would get. The lack of resources made it even more difficult for them to move forward. The days were getting more and more difficult, and it looked like he could not hold on any longer. Just as they thought that they had no hope in this life and were even about to give up, the token suddenly appeared. This seemingly ordinary but magical token had completely changed their fate. With the help of the hypermarket, the strength of the 6 of them increased rapidly, reaching a level that they had never dared to imagine in the past. However, they soon discovered that they had encountered a bottleneck. After developing to a certain limit on their own, they had no way to continue improving. The only way to solve this problem was to find a way to trade with others and obtain more cultivation resources. However, doing so would inevitably lead to danger. Secretly hiding an escort token was a very serious crime in itself. If they held a secret meeting to trade resources, it would be an unforgivable crime. Once they were caught, it would be difficult to die even if they wanted to. Instead, they would be refined into some strange thing and then suffer a long torture. There was an area around every magus tower, where all kinds of prisoners were being punished. Such an area was called the Wailing Forest. Some of the prisoners were stuffed into trees, some were turned into stones, and some had their heads sewn together with wild dogs. Each prisoner looked extremely tragic, as if they were better off dead. The prisoners would rather be killed than suffer such torture. Unfortunately, by that time, death would have become an extravagant hope and reward, and they would even live longer than ordinary humans. Faced with the obstacles of cultivation and the temptation of becoming a powerful wizard, the 6 of them finally chose to take the risk. They began to plan in secret, carefully preparing, and carefully contacting the secret sorcerer. After every secret meeting, they would retreat without hesitation and head to a new hidden location. When they arrived at the new location, they would make careful arrangements to ensure that every transaction would be successful. With this caution, the secret assembly was held many times without any problems. The Magi felt happy, but their worries also grew. They would eventually meet a ghost if they walked at night. Their actions would sooner or later attract the high attention of the Wizard Tower. Maybe one time, he would be taken out along with the pot. The worry had always been there, but there was no way to solve it, which had become the worry of the 6 secret sorcerers. What the 6 of them had to do now was to split the profits they had obtained last night, and then study their next move. However, the magus in charge of purchasing suddenly spoke up with an excited expression. It was obvious that he had something important to share with everyone. "My brothers, I know you've been worried that we'll be hunted down by the Magus Tower. After all, the situation was getting more and more tense, and the Magus Tower was completely sparing no effort in tracking the arrival token. In fact, I also have the same worry, and it's even more serious than you. It even seriously affected my cultivation and almost led to the invasion of my heart demon. Until I went to the supermarket this time, I met someone and finally found an opportunity." Chapter 3646. The kind sponsor 1. In a small wooden house hidden in a remote swamp, the young secret sorcerer was slowly explaining. He was beaming with joy, and his face was filled with suppressed excitement. "When I was in the super mall, I met a young human cultivator. He had a wide range of knowledge and was very familiar with the Magus world. He knew that I was weak, but he didn't look down on me. The information he had casually said were all secrets of the advanced Magus Tower. Without a certain status, it would be impossible to come into contact with them." During the conversation, he also talked about things related to academia, and the knowledge he had was even more amazing. In the process of talking to him, many problems that have troubled me for many years have all been perfectly solved. You might not be able to understand the feeling of being completely enlightened. It's simply the most wonderful enjoyment, and nothing can compare to it. The young wizard's face was filled with happiness and satisfaction, like a sage who had achieved enlightenment. The 5 sorcerers nodded to themselves. They could feel that their companion had undergone a complete transformation. She became more and more curious about his encounter. The young wizard continued to talk about his experience. "Even now, I'm still full of excitement. I feel like I can control the world. Perhaps it won't be long before I can make another breakthrough. All right, let's not talk about me for now. Let's get down to business." That cultivator talked to me and learned about the difficult situation the secret sorcerer was in, so he decided to help us. This batch of magic tools will be provided by the other party for free to exchange for the materials we need for cultivation. The 5 secret sorcerers were silent as they listened to their companion's story, their hearts filled with unspeakable envy. At the same time, he was sighing to himself, "Why can't I encounter such a good thing?" At the same time, there were also sorcerers who were suspicious. The human cultivator was too kind. Did he have any ill intentions? It was very normal to have such thoughts. In the cruel world of cultivation, such a good thing should not have happened. This was especially true in the sorcerer world, where fair exchange was more important. Even between a master and a disciple, one had to abide by this rule. In the Magus world, fair exchange was one of the rules that could not be questioned. Whether it was a gift between humans or a gift from nature, everything had its price calculated before it was given. The young magus who was in charge of purchasing the items nodded his head when he saw his companions' doubtful gazes. "I know your concerns, and I also know that there's no free lunch in this world. In the process of pursuing free food, you'll definitely lose more. They did make a request, and that was for us to become stronger and establish a secret wizard organization." He expressed his indignation and sympathy for the current situation of the Magus world, hoping that it could change the situation. In order to help the secret sorcerer, he is willing to provide the corresponding financial aid, and he doesn't need any return. Hearing their companion's story, the 5 magi looked at each other, shock flashing in their eyes. Wizards were not stupid, so they knew what the other party was up to. He was clearly trying to use the secret wizard to fight against the officially recognized wizard tower. If the goal was achieved, the sorcerer world would be in chaos and fall into a long period of unrest. A secret sorcerer with great power would definitely not be satisfied with the status quo, and would hope to obtain more benefits and speak. The sorcerer tower was hostile to the secret sorcerers, so naturally, they would not choose to compromise. They would definitely do their best to kill them. As long as there was a possibility, they would not allow the secret sorcerers to become too powerful, so as not to pose a threat to their own rule. To the secret sorcerer, however, he did not have much of a choice. No matter if they were content with mediocrity or rose up to resist, as long as they fell into the hands of the wizard tower, they would definitely not have a good end. The weaker one was, the more miserable one's situation was. Under such circumstances, it was better to work hard to improve his own strength and obtain more capital to save his life. Even when faced with the encirclement of the Magus Tower, they could still deal with it calmly. Even when they were powerful to a certain extent, even the Magus Tower would not dare to provoke them easily. In the Magus world, there were indeed many powerful secret magi, and their strength had been acknowledged by the officials. As long as they did not deliberately cause trouble, the wizard tower would not provoke this kind of secret wizard, thus avoiding unnecessary trouble. In the hearts of the 6 young secret sorcerers, they all had such a dream, hoping to become such a legend. In the past, it was just an extravagant hope, but now, he had a chance. As long as they agreed to cooperate, they would be able to obtain sufficient cultivation resources and help other secret magi get out of their predicament. If it were any other secret sorcerer, they might have had a lot of concerns and not know if they should agree or not. However, these 6 young secret sorcerers were already planning to lose their heads, so why would they have so many concerns? He knew that the human cultivators might have ulterior motives for this, but he still agreed without hesitation. After I die, I don't care about the flood. The personality of a magus was the same. They had unspeakable willfulness and deep selfishness. In order to achieve his goal, he would not hesitate even if he had to sacrifice the entire world. So, my friends, now tell me your choice. Do you accept the selfless help of the other party, or continue to endure the abuse and bullying from the wizard tower? The young magus looked at his companion and asked in a low voice. Although he didn't say anything, his question revealed his choice. He was very much in favor of this, and was full of hatred for the wizard tower. Now that he had made up his mind, he hoped that his companions would join him. If anyone chose to refuse, they would definitely go their separate ways. Since they were of different paths, they could not conspire against each other. What he wanted to do, he only needed partners who were willing to go through life and death together. I'm willing to join, count me in, I just want to say that we have no other choice. Let's do it, we'll overturn that fucking Magus Tower. His 5 companions expressed their willingness to continue working together and form an official secret sorcerers organization. They would no longer be on a small scale, but would continue to expand their scale until they had the capital to fight against the wizard tower. He even told himself that he wasn't being used by others, and that this was just a win-win cooperation. It was because they had long wanted to do this, but they were not strong enough, so they had been unable to do it. The 6 of them looked at each other and smiled. Since everyone had agreed, it was necessary to set new rules to ensure the smooth implementation of the plan. When wizards did things, efficiency was the most important thing. They believed that this was the necessary foundation for success. After the rules were set, a contract had to be signed to ensure that no one would reveal the secret. This was a necessary step. Even if they were as close as brothers, they couldn't be sloppy in this kind of thing. No one could guarantee that they wouldn't betray him, nor could they guarantee that others wouldn't betray him. The oath contract would be very important at this time, as it could effectively restrain and warn. After some discussion, the new plan had been formulated. For the time being, they still had to continue holding secret meetings like before. The difference from before was that they would still contact the secret wizards and invite them to join their organizations. In the past, there had been secret wizards who had expressed such desires, but they had been ruthlessly rejected. The rejection was out of consideration for their interests. They felt that the 6-member organization had already met. their needs and did not need to join more members to share the resources. Another reason was that they were wary of the other party's ill intentions. Now that they were actively recruiting members and were willing to give generous benefits, it was likely that those secret magi would actively join. After the discussion, the 6 wizards immediately began to move. The young wizard with the token entered the super mall excitedly. He wanted to find the human cultivator and tell him the good news. He also wanted to receive his first batch of supplies. Chapter 3647. The grand scheme of things. 1. In the super mall, there were still many people. After the mall officially opened, the number of customers increased, and they lingered on the long street. If it wasn't for the time limit, cultivators would have stayed in such a place for hundreds of years. The special environment of the super mall was comparable to a paradise. Cultivators were cultivating every moment they stayed. He was born in a famous family and naturally had an extraordinary reputation. The world of Lusheng was a high-energy world. Other than the 3 mysterious battle zones, the 4th battle zone could be considered the first of the 3,000 battle zones. The region of the 4th battle zone had already reached the highest concentration of world energy. If it was any denser, it would turn into liquid mist, which would be very troublesome. They only needed to maintain their peak state and didn't care about the cost just to help the cultivators in Lucheng increase their strength. Being in the world of Lusheng meant that one would be the beneficiary and enjoy expensive but free benefits. The super mall was an independent small world. However, it had also been contaminated with the spiritual beauty of the 4th battle district. Moreover, during the process of creation, Tang Zhen had intentionally increased the density of the heaven and earth energy. This part of the operating expenses would be borne by the cracked territory, and the cornerstone platform would not have any problems. Increasing the concentration of heaven and earth energy was not a difficult task. It could be done through the runic magic circle. However, this kind of formation consumed a lot of energy and it was difficult for ordinary cultivators to bear. If it was to create a paradise, the consumption was even more terrifying. Without enough wealth, one could not afford it. As a result, it was difficult for the mall to make a profit in the early stages of its operation, and it even had to constantly pay for it. Such an investment that disregarded the cost was naturally to attract enough customers and achieve some special goals at the same time. As for what it was for, perhaps only Tang Zhen knew. In a luxuriously decorated shop, many cultivators were browsing the goods, their eyes full of shock and greed. The goods in the shop were all of the highest quality, making people want to keep them. However, when he looked at the price of the trade, he could only sigh to himself, lamenting that he had no fate with the treasure. It wasn't strange that they couldn't afford it, because these items were all the treasures of the shop. No matter which plane they were taken to, only the true top-tier almighty beings were worthy of them. For ordinary cultivators, it would be a great opportunity for them to take a look at it or hear about it, let alone possess it. If he couldn't afford the highlight piece, he could look at other things. There was an item in the shop called the treasure wheel. It could display a variety of goods according to the intention of the person in need. Not only could it search for items, but it could also help cultivators diagnose their souls and give corresponding treatment plans. The cultivator would then follow the instructions and buy all kinds of spiritual medicine and pills, just like a doctor. It was a very convenient tool that helped cultivators solve all kinds of problems. The treasure wheel was indeed magical, but it was only a divine tool for searching. What was truly amazing was the store's foundation. Whatever a cultivator wanted, the shop would have it. This was not something everyone could do. Many cultivators believed that there must be a true almighty behind this shop. With the power of a god, they could easily transform into anything. To the cultivators in the high-level battlefields, the existence of the masters of creation was not a secret. They just couldn't understand why such a strong person would run a shop. Out of curiosity, he would naturally take a look. For cultivators from backward battlefields or other low-level planes, a shop with such a background was enough to make them look up to it. They often gathered here in order to broaden their horizons and have the opportunity to meet powerful cultivators. It would be a great opportunity if he could hear a few words of advice. In addition to the cultivators who strolled around the shop, there were also mysterious cultivators giving lectures on the stage. Those who dared to go up the stage to give a speech in public must have understood the rules of heaven and earth and were recognized by the Almighty. Otherwise, if the speech failed, he would be struck by lightning. When one reached a certain level, the so-called paths and methods were just superficial. Removing the dregs, extracting the essence, and simplifying it into a principle, One word was worth 1,000 gold. A single sentence from a true master could be 1,000,000 words from a false master. A powerful master only needed a single word of advice to benefit the cultivator greatly. In the super mall, customers from all over the world came and went, so there was naturally no lack of audiences. The cultivators gathered around the podium and were intoxicated by the music. They were not willing to leave at all. When the time limit was up, they would rather pay money to buy time and continued to stay to listen to the Tao. As time passed, more and more cultivators gathered around the platform. They all sat cross-legged around the platform and listened. At first glance, the number of cultivators was at least hundreds of thousands. Some of these cultivators were smiling, some were surprised, some were silent, and some had ferocious expressions. This was because he had gained something from hearing the Tao, so it was visible. Every time they heard of a wonderful thing, there would be cultivators who would cheer loudly and dance with joy. It was at this moment that they would break through the shackles and ascend to a higher realm. Similar situations could be seen in the venue from time to time. Every time a cultivator successfully broke through, they would bow deeply to the tall figure on the high platform. The gratitude in his heart was indescribable. Some cultivators who had heard the speech had already made up their minds to find out the identity of the speaker later and then treat him as a master. In the future, when he traveled in the outside world, he had to spread his master's name and express his gratitude. If he could truly acknowledge a master and become a direct disciple, then he would not have lived his life in vain. If he was successful in his cultivation, he would definitely be able to move unhindered in the greater world and leave behind a great reputation for himself and his master. Cultivators didn't care about fame and fortune, but some fame and fortune were indispensable. It was difficult to cultivate without money, and it was difficult to become a god without a name. If one was desired by thousands of living beings, even a mortal body would possess divine powers. Spreading the good name of cultivators was also a kind of sincere return to repay the favor of preaching and receiving enlightenment. The cultivators who had heard the speech were certain that the speaker must be a true almighty and was likely to be the real owner of the shop. In the current super mall, if one were to determine which store was the most popular, this store would definitely be the first to bear the brunt. The operators of the other shops in the mall were both envious and confused. After all, not everyone could invite such a powerful person to give a speech. This kind of behavior was more like doing good, trying to benefit the cultivators of all worlds and thus create countless opportunities. However, there were also cultivators who felt that there was a deeper meaning behind this move. The plot was not something ordinary cultivators could guess. Before he understood the truth, he must not easily imitate. A figure suddenly appeared and passed through the dense crowd without any obstruction, like a free fish. Although he had already gotten used to this rule, the young magus was still in awe. The plants and trees in the superstore, including every detail, were all eye-opening to this young magus. It was because he had entered the business world that he knew how vast the cultivation world was and how shallow his knowledge was. For wizards who were extremely curious and had a strong desire to explore, the super mall was a real protection. He had opened the door to knowledge for them, allowing them to see the vastness of the world and to be willing to spend their lives exploring and understanding it. If he couldn't do it, he would regret it for the rest of his life. It did not take long for the young wizard to enter the shop. He looked around and smiled in surprise. Not far away, a young cultivator in a purple robe was sitting cross-legged on the Nine Dragons platform. He was surrounded by purple clouds, and it was obvious that he was cultivating some strange technique. "Your Excellency, I'm here." The young magus bowed, his face filled with respect. The young magus had been completely convinced by their previous conversation, and there was no need to mention the respect he had for them. Moreover, the cultivator in front of him was willing to help the secret sorcerer get out of trouble, and he didn't need any reward. Meeting such a senior, it was definitely a blessing of 3 lifetimes, and there was no need to say the gratitude in his heart. "It's good that you're here." Hearing the young wizard's greeting, Tang Zhen slowly opened his eyes and revealed a gentle smile. Chapter 3648, Mills 1. Tang Zhen's smile was warm, giving people the feeling of being bathed in the spring wind. It was because of this smile that the young magus took the initiative to approach him and was willing to reveal his true feelings. As if he had met a confidant, he spoke freely. Now that he met Tang Zhen again, the wizard told him about his success with the mentality of taking credit. "My companions are willing to work together to change the situation of the secret sorcerers. They also expressed their respect to you through me, and thank you for your help to the secret magi." The young magus used simple words to explain what had happened after he returned. As expected, he received Tang Zhen's praise and affirmation. The magi who were encouraged were even more elated. After chatting with Tang Zhen for a while and asking a few questions, the young wizard left with a smile on his face. When he left the mall, the resources promised by Tang Zhen had already been distributed to the young wizard. The value of this batch of aid was far higher than he had imagined, yet Tang Zhen had given it away without the slightest hesitation. The young magus had just left when the environment suddenly changed. A giant crystal tree appeared behind Tang Zhen. Heaven and earth were like mirrors, pure and free of impurities. As the waves flickered, another figure appeared. His entire body was tightly covered. The token clearly had the ability to conceal his identity, but the other party had added an extra layer of concealment. He tried his best to hide his identity and did not want outsiders to know. After this figure appeared, he quietly looked at Tang Zhen. His expression contained a trace of hesitation. "You still haven't made your choice." Tang Zhen looked at the other party. His tone was unusually calm and did not carry the slightest fluctuation in emotion. At this moment, his attitude was completely different from when he was talking to the young wizard. He was more like a businessman who was negotiating for benefits. "That's right, it's hard for me to make up my mind." The voice was hoarse like iron pieces rubbing against each other. At the same time, it had a strange tone. Without a doubt, this was another kind of disguise. "If I were you, I wouldn't hesitate any longer. The longer you delay, the worse it will be for your family. If I'm not wrong, your current situation should be even more difficult." A trace of pity flashed across Tang Zhen's eyes when he said this. "Your family has a long history and has made great contributions to the Magus world. Such a contribution cannot be erased. In the end, because of the death of the ancestor, he was treated unfairly, completely disregarding his past contributions. Now, they had gone even further. They were being targeted by their competitors and were even forced to move out of the ancestral land. Anyone who heard of this matter would feel extreme injustice for your family." Tang Zhen sighed softly when he spoke up to this point. It was as though he was sighing with emotion at the sorrow of a hero's end. That figure trembled intensely when he heard Tang Zhen's emotional sigh. He seemed to be suppressing an indescribable anger. But in the blink of an eye, it turned into a long sigh. "That's right, I'm extremely unwilling, but what can I do? I'm afraid you don't understand the sorcerer world and don't know how powerful and terrifying it is. The sorcerer towers scattered all over the world are enough to suppress any resistance. High up in the void, there were even more powerful existences. They were the masters of the sorcerer world, incarnated into great stars, and silently watched the sorcerer world. Unless the sorcerer world was destroyed, it was impossible for them to take action. However, once they took action, no one would be able to resist. I truly don't have the courage to resist against such an existence, because I'll always end up in failure." Mill's heart was filled with helplessness and pain when he said this. Because of his special family background, he knew enough secrets and understood how deep the waters of the Magus world were. The more secrets he knew, the more he didn't dare to act rashly. He could only silently endure the humiliation from the enemy. Because he was very clear that if he chose to accept his fate, he would still have a chance to live. At most, he would lose his current glory. However, if they resisted, not only would they lose everything, but their lives would also be in danger. However, this kind of life was destined to be full of humiliation, which he could not bear. Not all wizards in the family were willing to live in shame. They would rather sacrifice themselves to fight against this injustice. However, the stubborn old man in the family did not allow resistance at all. Instead, he chose to bear all the injustice. If someone dared to declare resistance, even without the enemy's intervention, they would be the first to be suppressed by the stubborn old men. In the face of such a situation, Millys could only respond with a bitter smile, and there was nothing else he could do. As the most outstanding descendant of his family, Millys had a great future, and could even become a big shot in the Magus world. However, with the fall of the ancestor, everything became a bubble. In terms of unwillingness and pain, no one could compare to him, and no one could bear more pressure than him. As the leader of the younger generation, he was stuck in the middle of different forces, and his situation was awkward and painful. The old antiques chose to back down and suppress the rebels, but they also let Mills take the lead and be responsible for pacifying and mediating the rebels. Mills was originally unwilling, but he still had to face the unwillingness and anger of the newcomers, as well as their tearful and bitter pleas. Both sides wanted to protect each other, but in the end, both sides were not happy. The elders of the family thought that he did not do his best and that he was not capable enough to take on great responsibilities. Their attitude towards him was quite cold, and their words were full of sarcasm. The younger generation was filled with hostility and treated Millys as the lackey of the family elders. They no longer respected him as they did in the past. Such a situation made Millys extremely pained, and he was on the verge of collapse. He was able to persist until now because of the secret summons of the ancestor and the high hopes he had placed on him. At that time, the ancestor had already had a premonition that he was about to encounter an accident and said that only he could lead the family out of the crisis. So no matter what, Mills had to persevere, for the continuation of the family, and not let down the expectations of his ancestors. Just as Mills was struggling to hold on, something suddenly happened in the Magus world, and they began to search for the token. Mills was extremely surprised by such a large force. This was the first time he had encountered such a thing. He was also very interested in the token. As a family that once ruled the first ring of the land, although it had declined, it still had a considerable influence. There were also many wizard towers in the family that had received the same search mission. It was the same for Millys, and he quickly received a welcome token. In the beginning, he didn't understand the use of the token, and he didn't understand why the higher-ups of the sorcerer world were acting as if they were facing a great enemy. In the end, he accidentally activated the token and Mills entered the super mall. The moment his soul entered, the excitement and shock in Mills's heart could no longer be described with words. Compared to an ordinary magus, Mills, who was the top genius of his family, had far more knowledge than ordinary people. He could see the power of the super mall. The mysteries and wonders were completely beyond his imagination. To a sorcerer, this was an ocean of knowledge, a paradise where one could explore the true mysteries. Mills was so immersed in it that he didn't want to leave. This token had been kept by Millys without permission and had not been handed over. And he was very clear that any wizard tower that knew the secret of the token would make the same choice. In the following period of time, Millys's main focus was on the super mall. He learned how to trade in the mall and obtained all kinds of knowledge. His originally stagnant realm also began to slowly rise. Mills was overjoyed, and he became more and more engrossed. He no longer paid any attention to the troubles of his family. Or perhaps he wanted to use this method to increase his strength so that he could have a greater say. As long as his strength increased and he could surpass the elders of the family, he might be able to do some things according to his will. However, he didn't expect that during this period of time, the suppression of his family's enemies had become more and more serious, to the extent that they were like fire and water. Mills was forced to step forward again and take charge of resolving this matter, only to find that there was no turning back. The family's glory might be completely gone, completely letting down the expectations of the ancestors. Just as he was feeling sad, angry, and distressed, Tang Zhen took the initiative to come to his door. Not only did he know his identity, but he also understood his situation and even proposed a solution. After resisting and plundering, he would leave the sorcerer world and become a member of Lu Cheng's cultivators. Chapter 3649. The scheme against the sorcerer world. 1. Millis was extremely shocked by Tang Zhen's suggestion. Although the family was being suppressed by the enemy and the situation was getting more and more difficult, Mills had never thought of rebelling. At most, they would fight to the death with their enemies and end up perishing together. Of course, he was also clear that perishing together was just wishful thinking. The enemy was far more powerful than they had imagined. It was the alliance of many families, which was the main reason why the Mills family could not fight against them. In fact, he only had himself to blame for this. Before the family's ancestor had fallen, the Mills family held the position of ring master and had great power and reputation. There were many magi in the family, but they were a mix of good and bad, and they had done many things that tarnished the family's reputation. There were even some disciples who relied on the power of their ancestors to bully other families. He had also heard about the things that angered the heavens and the people. Because of the fear of their ancestors, those families did not dare to resist and could only choose to silently endure. After a long time, his hatred was like a suppressed volcano that finally erupted after the ancestor's death. After losing the protection of their ancestor, the Millys family first lost their position as ring master, and then they suffered all kinds of targeted revenge. The Magi in the family were attacked for various reasons, and the news of the deaths of their clansmen kept coming. The vicious enemy began to take revenge. The Mills family was very powerful. They had thought that they could deal with the chaos, but the enemy was far crazier than they had imagined. In fact, there seemed to be other progenitors supporting them behind the scenes, just to target the Mills family. Because of the other party's participation, the Mills family's advantage disappeared in an instant, and they were forced to retreat by the enemy. After several important elders were killed and many wizard towers were destroyed, the members of the Mills family finally realized that their era was over. In the face of an increasingly dangerous situation, the originally arrogant and overbearing family members also began to keep a low profile. They stayed at home and didn't go anywhere at all, thinking that they could avoid danger by doing so. But even so, he still couldn't escape death. He was killed in his home. Mills tribesmen finally realized that their enemies from the past were clearly trying to exterminate them. The wizards of the family did not want to wait for their deaths, so they started to fight back together. However, the outcome was already decided in the face of a powerful enemy. At this time, the elders of the family stood out and asked to negotiate with the enemy. They were willing to pay a certain price, even their current territory and property, in exchange for their own safety. This was already a great concession, even a groveling, but he did not get the expected result. The enemy was overbearing and had no intention of negotiating. They only wanted to exterminate the Mills family. The negotiations between the two sides continued for a long time. During this period, there were constant fights, and the family gradually fell apart. With the efforts of the family elders, the negotiation finally achieved an effective result. The enemy was willing to give up this battle that would cost them 800 yuan. As long as the Mills family gave up everything and headed to the most barren and remote Broken Ring, they could stop the attack. Such a request was extremely excessive. It was a completely different kind of exterminating. The Broken Ring was the outermost ring of the sorcerer world. It was the largest and the weakest, and it was always in a damaged state. Cultivating in this broken ring was equivalent to planting rice in the desert. The cultivation environment was extremely harsh. In this shattered ring, out of the hundreds of thousands of residents, there might not even be a single one with cultivation talent. Such a low ratio even made the sorcerers rule out the broken ring and think that it did not belong to the sorcerer world. Once the Mills family went to the ring of destruction, it would be equivalent to falling into a desperate situation, and the destruction of the family would only be a matter of time. In the end, the enemy still had no intention of letting the Mills family off. They just changed to a slow and painful method, slowly torturing and humiliating the Mills family. By right, such a vicious request should not have been agreed to at all, because that would be equivalent to seeking one's own destruction. However, the truth was unexpected. The elders of the family actually agreed to this request. After the news spread, there was an uproar. Many of the Mills family's younger generation immediately stood up to object, their attitudes extremely firm. He said that even if he died in battle, he would not accept this condition, and called it the ultimate humiliation of the Mills family. There was also a group of family members who remained silent because they were the direct descendants of those family elders. As for the decision of the elders, even if they were unwilling, they could only silently follow it. Furthermore, they also believed that the elder must have already thought of a way out for him to make such a decision. Even if someone was unlucky, it might not be their turn. The conflict was getting deeper and deeper, and the differences were getting bigger and bigger. The once powerful Mills family was about to fall into a situation of disunity. At this critical moment, Millis, who had been ostracized by the higher-ups of the family and had a bad reputation, was forced to step down to preside over the chaos. Anyone with eyes could tell that Millis was a scapegoat. If things were handled well, it was only right. If not, he would have to bear all the blame. Now that things had gotten to this point, in order to maintain the family's stability and calm the raging anger, there had to be someone of equal status to take the blame. The elders definitely couldn't do that. As the decision makers, no matter if they were right or wrong, they definitely wouldn't point their guns at him. Mills became the best choice and accepted the orders of the Elder Council to pacify and suppress the family magi who opposed the outcome of the negotiations. The despairing and disheartened Mills met Tang Zhen in the super mall and received a suggestion that he didn't even dare to think about. An act of betraying and fleeing was equivalent to cutting off all paths of retreat. The enemy would no longer be just those Magus families, but would even have to face the suppression and pursuit of the entire Magus world. As an elite sorcerer, No one knew better than Mills how terrifying the foundation of the sorcerer world was. Compared to them, the Mills family was like a dragon and an ant. They were not on the same level at all. Anyone who dared to go against the sorcerer world would die without a doubt. There was no chance of winning at all. However, on second thought, even if they were to go against those allied families, they still had no chance of winning. The two of them would not be able to escape death, but there was still a chance of survival if they defected. However, as a pure-blood sorcerer, and his ancestor was once one of the 360 ancient stars of the sorcerer world, such a pure-blood identity made Mills naturally resistant to betrayal. He did not agree to Tang Zhen's request. Instead, he indicated that he would consider it. In reality, he had already made a choice in his heart. He had to refuse. Tang Zhen didn't try to persuade him further. He said that if Mills changed her mind, she could come to this shop to find him at any time. In Tang Zhen's plan, Mills was just an ordinary chess piece. It didn't matter if he was willing to cooperate or not. If there was one, it would be like adding flowers to a brocade, but if there was no, it would not affect the plan. During this period of time, Tang Zhen had been looking for suitable targets in the super mall, and they were all targeted at the wizard world. The existence of this super mall made it extremely easy for Tang Zhen to collect information. Every move of the cultivators here would be collected and sorted out by the super mall. When the cultivator felt that he had taken advantage of the super store, he didn't know that he was actually just taking back his own reward. There were many reasons why they targeted the sorcerer world. First of all, Tang Zhen had an old enmity with the Magus world. This matter would have to be explained sooner or later. The invader was bound to pay the price. The other reason was to show off his skills by fighting against the Magus world, and at the same time, spread the name of the cracked territory. As for the third reason, the expansion and upgrade of the cracked territory required a large number of cultivators. The Magus world, which was also a high-energy world, was naturally the best choice. It became the target of Tang Zhen's attempt to poach. Chapter 3650, Mills's Choice 1. In a dark room, Mills opened his eyes, revealing an unusually grave expression. Tang Zhen's words were still ringing in his ears at this moment. After a series of incantations, the token in his hand instantly merged into Mills' body. If it was an outsider, they would only be able to find the token on him if they searched his body. I. Mills sighed softly, hesitating. If it was the Mills of the past, he would definitely not believe that he was wavering. The pure-blood Magus who had originally been determined not to accept the rebellion was actually thinking about the possibility of a rebellion. As long as there was a chance, Mills would not think about this question, because it would make him feel ashamed. To the pure-blood sorcerers, the sorcerer world was their true home, the source of the sorcerers' rise. Mills felt a wave of sorrow. He did not want to betray the camp, but he was determined to force him and his family to death. Thinking about his own persistence, Mills felt that it was not worth it. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, he was a fool. He had been stabbed by a knife, only one step away from his heart, but he still refused to fight back. Such an action was extremely stupid. Just as Mills was in a daze, a notification suddenly rang out, indicating that someone had come to visit. With a single thought, Mills left the secret chamber and appeared in the luxuriously decorated hall. A few figures appeared. They were all Mills' followers and the core of his camp. Despite the changes in the outside world, Mills' followers had always been silently supporting him. Furthermore, they firmly believed that Mills was the family's hope, and only he could help the family tide over this crisis. Mills' persistence was also related to these followers. "You're here. What's the matter?" Mills's mood improved after seeing his followers, and he asked with a smile. The few magi looked at each other and hesitated, as if they were too embarrassed to speak. "What's wrong?" Mills' expression did not change, but his heart sank slightly, and he had a bad feeling. The branch of the family on the Red Earth Plains has announced that they are leaving the family and are ready to fight to the death with the enemy. A wizard said slowly, but the news he brought made Mills fall into silence. The family branch of the Red Earth Plains had always been his biggest supporter, and they had considerable power. At first, Mills was thinking of summoning the head of the Red Valley Plains family and having a deeper conversation with them. Even if they were forced to move, they had to avoid losses as much as possible. Who knew when Dongshan Mountain would rise again? However, he didn't expect that Mills was silent for a few moments, then asked in a low voice, "Why did you do that?" Didn't they promise that they would follow my orders and not act recklessly? This question was filled with disappointment and anger. They are doing this because they have no other choice. A magus said with an angry expression. The enemy launched a sneak attack on the Red Earth Plains, causing heavy casualties. The 11 elite juniors of the branch chief were all killed in battle. The furious branch family head was ready to activate the formation to kill all the enemies, but the family elders came forward to stop him, saying that the scale of the conflict must not be expanded. The enemy finally retreated in one piece, and the branch patriarch then gave the order to leave the Mills family and prepare to fight to the death with the enemy. The magus sighed again, his face filled with grief and indignation. The branch head asked me to tell you that he had high hopes for you and believed that you could help the family get out of this crisis. In the end, you let him down. Cowardly, pedantic, and sacrificing the interests of your own people to please those damn old things, woo-woo. Shut up, Mills roared, his expression twisted. He had never thought that he would be such an ugly person in the eyes of his followers. He didn't want to admit that the other party wasn't talking about him. However, when his followers were attacked by enemies and bullied by the elders of the clan, what were they doing and what could they do? When he thought about the responsibilities he had on his shoulders, Mills felt even more ridiculous. They would pacify and suppress the opposing forces in the family, make them accept the outcome of the negotiations, and abandon everything to move to that barren land. By playing this role, he was standing at the forefront, blocking the anger and blame for those old things. The more Mills thought about it, the more depressed he felt. He wanted to roar out loud and destroy everything. The few magi looked at each other. They had clearly sensed that something was wrong with Mills' situation. The magus who was responsible for reporting the news hesitated for a moment, but he still spoke. Your Excellency, I want to bid you farewell. The gloomy Mills slowly raised his head, and his dark eyes were like an abyss. You're going to the Red Earth Plains. The magus nodded with difficulty as he faced Millis's gaze. That's right, even if I die, I will defend the dignity of the family. Even if we successfully move to the Shattered Ring area, we'll only be barely alive. If the enemy makes a move again, it'll be much easier to kill us. Since I'm going to die sooner or later, I might as well fight the enemy. Even if I die, I'll die a happy death. These words had been in his heart for a long time, and now that he said it all in one breath, the magus' face was full of comfort. Since he had chosen to leave, he didn't have too many concerns. What he didn't dare to say in the past, he said it now. In addition, I've also heard that some of the direct descendants of the clan are secretly preparing for war. That group of cowards didn't have the courage to fight the enemy at all. Their behavior was very suspicious. It took me a lot of effort to get some information. They seem to be launching a plane invasion. The magus suddenly sneered, his face full of mockery. I finally understand why they chose to compromise and accept the idea of moving to the Shattered Ring area. It turned out that they had already prepared an escape route, letting some fools wait for death in the Ring of Destruction area to attract the enemy's firepower. They would secretly launch a plane invasion, then build an unbreakable plane barrier, and hide in a certain plane world like a turtle. As for our life and death, it has nothing to do with them. The magus looked at Mills with a hint of pity. I just don't know if you've received any notice or if you're one of them. Or was he kept in the dark by those old fogies from the start? The magus smiled sarcastically. It was unknown if he was talking about Millis or himself, who had been abandoned. Mills was silent. He only waved his hand, signaling the wizard to leave. The other two wizards also bowed. Your Excellency, please. Mills' eyes were cold as he looked at the two followers he regarded as his left and right arms. A hint of confusion flashed in his eyes. If you want to go, then go. Remember to take care of yourself, don't die too early, hee. There was something in Mills' heart that she wanted to say, but it was stuck in her throat. In the end, he still shook his head and sighed. Hearing this, the Magi did not hesitate any longer and bowed as they prepared to leave. But at this moment, on the wall of the hall, a statue of an evil demon came alive. Mills, look at what you've done. If you don't deal with the rebellion of the Red Earth branch, you'll be punished by the Elder Council. The messenger was a direct descendant, a direct disciple of an elder of the family. He had been overestimating his own abilities in competing with Mills. At this moment, he was in charge of passing down orders, and his tone was filled with unspeakable pride and gloating. Hee, Yingluo. Mills sneered and waved his hand at the wall. The evil demon statue instantly exploded, and the spirit attached to it was also injured. Mills, How dare you attack me? Ignoring the clamoring behind him, Mills turned around and looked at his followers who were about to leave. Their faces were filled with confusion, as if they could not understand Mills. In the past, given Mills's style, he would never have done such a thing. Rebellion. Perhaps it's also a kind of choice. Chapter 3651. Millis's transformation won the unreasonable reprimand from the elders of the family and the mockery from those good-for-nothings had destroyed Mills' determination. At this moment, he finally made up his mind. He still had to protect his family, which was in danger, and protect the family members who truly trusted him. He didn't want to protect those selfish bastards who sacrificed their family's interests. Perhaps from the beginning to the end, he was just a chess piece for the other party to play with. It was a pity that he had realized it too late, or perhaps he had understood everything but was unwilling to wake up. In the past, he would watch the people around him get hurt, but he would deliberately turn a blind eye to it, or find some poor excuses to deceive himself. He even had a faint expectation that his sacrifice would be able to redeem something. It was like a child acting pitiful to gain the pity of his elders. Even when the last group of trusted aides around him also chose to leave because of disappointment and hatred, he still stubbornly persisted. At this moment, Mills was not actually thinking for the sake of his family. He was just trying to maintain his dignity and did not want to admit how badly he had lost. At this time, the elders rebuked Mills and put the main responsibility for the mishap of the Red 2 tribe on his head. If the situation could not be salvaged, Mills would be severely punished. To be so indiscriminate was simply insane. Mills had never thought that the family he had tried his best to protect would be so ugly. It was obvious that he was treating him as a fool, shouting at him as he pleased, kicking him aside when he didn't need him, and using him to suffer his anger when he needed him. This bunch of damned idiots should all be sent to hell. No, sending them to hell would be letting them off too easily. They should be sent to the Wailing Forest and modified with the most vicious methods, making them suffer pain and torture all the time. Mills was shocked by his own thoughts. He had never thought that he would have such vicious thoughts in his heart. And the target was the clan elder that he had always respected and protected with all his might. The most important thing was that Mills actually felt extremely satisfied, and even had the urge to try it out. This was enough to show that he had been thinking about this for a long time. However, it was hidden very well, so Mills did not discover it. However, at this moment, it had completely revealed itself. It was so huge that it was unbelievable. In the past, Mills would have suppressed him without any hesitation if he had encountered such a situation. But now, Mills decided to let loose for once and let go of the evil in his heart. His appearance came from his heart, and Mills's expression was extremely sinister. The followers who were familiar with Mills suddenly had a feeling that the familiar Mills had become extremely unfamiliar. What's with this Yingluo? The followers looked at each other. They had originally planned to leave, but now they were hesitating. You guys come here, I have some things to arrange, Missler said slowly, a warm and relaxed smile on his face. It was as if he had already let go of all the pressure. That sunny and confident attitude could only be seen on Missler before his ancestor had died. However, if one looked closely, they would see a bone-chilling coldness from Mills. It didn't take long for his followers to leave. However, their faces were still filled with shock, as well as unspeakable excitement and surprise. Originally, leaving the family had made them feel extremely heavy, but now it was completely different. This was because they were no longer floating ducklings, but had a leader and backing. Originally, they were only fighting to defend their dignity, but now, there was a real possibility that the situation could be reversed. As he watched his followers leave one after another, Mills sneered and summoned the other followers. As the brightest star of the family, the influence that Missler had was unparalleled, even more so among the younger generation. Even if he had been used by the elders and his influence had been severely depleted, he still had a pivotal position in the family. It didn't take long for silhouettes to appear in Mills's Magus Tower. They came with confusion and anger, but when they left, they were full of shock. Only one thought lingered in their minds. Perhaps the Mills family is about to change. At this moment, Mills had returned to his previous state and was calmly making arrangements. He wanted to use facts to prove that the ancestor had not misjudged him, and that the clan would definitely be able to rise again in his hands. As for those selfish old fogies who sold their families for glory, it was time to make them hand over everything and accept punishment for what they had done. After the initial setup was completed, Mills returned to the secret chamber. In the blink of an eye, the token appeared in his hand. It looked ordinary. However, only by experiencing it would one know how magical this token was. It was simply an incredible pioneering work. In the past, Missler had always thought that the Magus world was extremely powerful, and could even be said to be the strongest in the cultivation world. This was because magi were born with curiosity and self-improvement. They would never be satisfied with what they had, and would always find ways to obtain more. This kind of behavior was not greed, but a kind of positive desire to improve, and the plunder was definitely not just about wealth. However, the existence of the superstore made Missler realize that he was still a frog in a well. If things continued to develop normally, perhaps one day in the future, the sorcerer world would really become the most powerful world. But now, there was a place that was stronger than the Magus world. Or was he stronger? Without a detailed investigation, Mills would not come to a conclusion. Mills was still hesitating about whether to use the token again, because once he made such a decision, there would be no turning back. However, on second thought, when had he ever had a way out? With a slight smile, Mills activated the token. In the super mall, it was still crowded with people and had a liveliness that couldn't be seen anywhere else. However, at this moment, Mills could see through the surface and realize the power of the super mall. The flow of people not only brought wealth, but also enough information, which could allow the world of Lusheng to easily grasp the situation of the outside world. Just like the rules that wizards believed in, everything in the world was in an exchange form. They gained and lost at the same time. The more they were shocked by the magic of the super mall, the more they rejoiced at the benefits they had obtained here, and the greater the price they had to pay. The current Magus world, perhaps due to the existence of the supermarket, was already filled with ant nests and swarming channels. Once the ferocious waves arrived, the seemingly indestructible dam would very likely collapse in an instant. No more than 3 generations of wealth, no more than 100 years of power. A human saying that Mills had heard before appeared in his mind. He felt that it was very appropriate to use it on his family or the Magus world. It didn't take long for the shop to appear in front of them. Mills walked in and saw the figure standing under the glazed treasure tree. He smiled gently and calmly. It was as if he had seen through everything and was waiting for Mills to arrive. Looking at the figure in front of him, Mills bowed with an extremely pious attitude. "I'm willing to accept your suggestion and your financial support. I swear to join the world of Lusheng." Chapter 3652, Just a Chess Piece 1. Mills did not stay for long. When he left the mall, he could not suppress his excitement. The truth was as he had thought. Tang Zhen had only displayed the tip of the iceberg, and it was enough to make him feel incomparably shocked. It turned out that in such a short time, the sorcerer world had been eroded to this extent, and he had no idea about it before. If he had not accepted the plan and chosen to escape the sorcerer world, he would never have known how deep the water was. Mills was also pondering to himself. If he chose to betray the contract and inform the higher-ups of the Magus world, what would the result be? The answer he got was that it might not attract much attention, but it would definitely implicate him. The originally bad situation would inevitably become worse. The family's current situation had been tacitly approved by the higher-ups of the Magus world. They needed to support a new ring master, so they naturally had to get rid of an eyesore. No matter how much Mills tried to please him, he would not have a good ending. The Magus world's ancestor level would definitely be paying attention to the supermarket, and would know more than he did. They would benefit the sorcerer world without suffering any losses, and when the safety of the sorcerer world was threatened, they would stop it in time. Of course, there was also a possibility that the ancestral sorcerer of the sorcerer world would be helpless in the face of the token. If that was the case, he would have to reevaluate the strength of the world of Lusheng. However, a game of this level had little to do with Mills. They couldn't hear about it, and they couldn't participate in it. Otherwise, they would be seeking their own death. If they were not careful, they would be crushed to death. As for what he was going to do, it was nothing much. It would be difficult to attract the attention of the ancestral wizard. Similar things were actually not uncommon. It was like a heavy rain, and he was just a raindrop in it, not worth mentioning at all. The more Mills thought about it, the more shocked he became. He felt as weak as an ant. He had naively thought that his talent and cultivation would be enough for him to gain a foothold in the cultivation world. In the end, it was proven that even an ancestor-level existence could also die. For an existence like him, once he was involved in an irresistible catastrophe, it was very likely that he would die without any sound. Only by constantly becoming stronger and relying on a suitable organization could he exchange it for long-term stability. This thought strengthened Mill's confidence. He flipped his palm upwards, and an item appeared in his hand. It was a flawless crystal, but there was a 7-colored mist inside. With just a glance, one could tell that it was definitely extraordinary. This was one of Tang Zhen's sponsorships for Millie's. It allowed her to possess the power of a god for a period of time. In the Magus world, there was also the title of Magus God, but this was not the same as that god. In the eyes of a sorcerer, a god was just a powerful super life form, and a sorcerer god was just a name used to measure one's strength. There were no longer any sorcerer gods in Mill's family. Perhaps this was the real reason for their decline. A family that didn't even have a wizard god cultivator was no longer worthy of its former status and glory. It was only natural for them to be expelled and suppressed. If Mills had the power of a sorcerer god, he would be able to easily crush the old fogies in his family. It wasn't like in the past, where he had no choice but to compromise because his strength wasn't as good as those elders. As long as he could suppress these elders and gain control of the family, Mills would be able to carry out his plan more smoothly. Since they had signed the contract, there was no way out, so Mills no longer hesitated. Absorb. With Mills's manipulation, the divine source stored inside the crystal continuously flowed into his body. Mills's expression was serious as he guided the seal. He didn't dare to be careless. This wasn't a power cultivated by one's own body, but a pure weapon. It could hurt one's own body while hurting the enemy. Under normal circumstances, once the divine source entered his body, Mills would definitely die. This was because the divine source had divinity, which was equivalent to the consciousness of a human. It would definitely not be controlled by cultivators below the level of gods. They would rather self-destruct than be used and absorbed by others. However, the divine source in Mills's hands had been personally given to her by Tang Zhen. It came from a lower-level deity in her mind's divine kingdom. There were no restrictions, and Mills could activate and use it at any time. As for Tang Zhen's divine source, Millie's was not qualified to receive it. After all, he was an existence equivalent to the ancestor of the Magus world. Even if Mills used it forcefully, it would not end well in the end. It was very likely that he would be completely crippled. Tang Zhen was very optimistic about Mills' potential and believed that she had the possibility of becoming a god in the future. Cultivators with such potential were sought after by the various territories and would be nurtured at all costs. Tang Zhen would definitely do the things that the other territories had to do. There was another reason why Tang Zhen made a move on the wizard world. It was because the tower world lacked a complete wizard inheritance. The various inheritances of the cornerstone platform were obtained after conquest. The world of Lusheng had not conquered the sorcerer world, so naturally, there were no detailed inheritances to learn and exchange. Tang Zhen wanted to get these inheritances so that the cultivators in Lusheng City would have more choices. If the cultivators from other territories wanted to get similar inheritances, they had to pay war points. He also wanted to use this matter to prove his strength so that the other territories would not dare to provoke him. Without the intimidation of powerful strength, trouble would come one after another. Anyone would want to step on it a few times to see if they could gain some benefits. If he displayed a powerful method that was enough to shock everyone, the provocators would disappear. He even had to be careful, afraid that he would be provoked. Tang Zhen had already advanced to the God King realm. He would definitely raise the strength of his territory to a level that would make any enemy fear him. After some time, Millie's finished absorbing the energy. Although there was no change on the surface, he could feel the terrifying power in his body, and his confidence grew. The next thing he had to do was to immediately take action without any delay. The family's enemies simply didn't have enough patience. Once they noticed that the situation was not right, they would immediately attack. From the very beginning, they had no intention of letting Mills' family off. The forced relocation was just a strategy. To be able to destroy the Mills family at the lowest cost was naturally worth a try. Mills began to move, sending out secret orders one after another, and his followers also began to move. They had been contacting the Magi who were unhappy with their families and inviting them to join the rebellion. There was basically no problem for them to become the target of the communication. They would eventually choose to join the plan and sign a soul contract. Those magi who refused to cooperate or wavered would be controlled or eliminated in secret. Before the official operation, he could not reveal the secret and let the elders know. Once that happened, the operation would be a complete failure, and the wizards who participated in the plan would die without a doubt. Mills did not only contact the family wizards, but also sent his trusted followers to contact secret wizards and resistance organizations. They were dissatisfied with the Magus world's rule and were the best partners and allies. Mills did not know much about these wizards and organizations in the past, so it was impossible for her to get in touch with them in a hurry. Detailed information about these organizations was included in the aid provided by Tang Zhen. Mills only needed to send his trusted aides to contact them. Mills couldn't help but sigh inwardly. It was obvious that Tang Zhen had long been prepared. The reason he chose him was only because he met the conditions. Without him, there would be another fellow who would have no choice but to accept Tang Zhen's recruitment under circumstances where he had no choice. Chapter 3653, Killing their way into the secret realm. When the surging undercurrent under the water finally stirred up a slight wave. The Magi of the Elder Line had always been secretly monitoring the family. On one hand, it was to escape the disaster, and on the other hand, it was to prevent any unforeseen events from happening. In fact, they were very clear that the family was full of complaints and had reached the point of falling apart. The separation of the Red Earth Plains family was only the beginning. As the situation worsened, more Magi would choose to leave. In the face of a family that had no future but was suppressed and persecuted in every way, escaping was actually the wisest choice. Otherwise, the final outcome would be to be buried together with them, and all of them would enter the grave. The family's wizards were still useful, and it was not time to abandon them. In order to prevent any accidents, the Elder Council had to keep a close watch on them. Mills was no exception. Similarly, there were people monitoring him in secret to prevent him from doing anything out of line. Mills had long noticed such surveillance, but he deliberately pretended not to know. After cooperating with Tang Zhen and carrying out the plan, these hidden sentries were eliminated one by one. The process of the operation was silent, and the people monitoring in the dark did not react at all. He had originally thought that his mission was to secretly monitor Mills, but he had no idea that he had already been exposed. After getting rid of all the hidden sentries, Mills sped up the operation because it wouldn't take long for the Elder Council to receive the news. At that time, the other party would definitely suppress him with all their might to prevent the situation from getting out of control. If Mills wanted to counterattack, he could not hesitate. With an order, the wizards who firmly followed him gathered in the secret space of his wizard tower. All the wizards were excited because they were doing something that could change the history of their families. If he failed, needless to say, he would definitely die. However, if he succeeded, the clan would undergo a tremendous change and a new chapter would be opened. At that time, these followers would definitely receive generous rewards. There were also some followers who were unwilling to be bullied and humiliated like this purely because of their beliefs. No matter what his goal was, he had already reached this point and there was no way out. After all the followers had arrived, there was no need to say anything and they immediately began to move. Time was of the essence and the situation was critical. Every second counted. With a group of followers, Mills drove straight into the secret realm where his family was located. "What do you want? Get out of here immediately." The guards of the family's secret realm were all the direct descendants of those elders. Although they didn't have much authority, their attitude was extremely arrogant. Currently, other than the direct descendants of the elders, other family members were not allowed to enter the clan's secret realm. This special secret realm was originally opened by the ancestors so that the younger generation of the family could cultivate better. However, today, it had become the private territory of the elders. This was undoubtedly abusing his power for personal gain. However, in the face of a group of colluding elders who held the power of the family, the members of the family really had no choice. Their status and influence, including their own strength, could not compete with these elders. Even if some of the members chose to resist, they would be like a pile of loose sand, easily suppressed and defeated. However, things were different now. They followed Mills and no longer had any fear. Mills's eyes were cold as he faced the elder's descendant who was blocking his way, and he immediately launched an attack. In an instant, the two magi were engulfed in flames. They didn't even have time to scream before they were turned into a pile of ashes. The wizards near the entrance were shocked. They didn't expect this to happen. Just as they rushed over and tried to stop the counterattack, the Magi following Mills had already made the first move. Before they took action, they had received help from the Super Mall, and their excellent weapons and equipment had doubled their combat power. When fighting with the enemy, he could even kill them in seconds. The sudden turn of events alarmed the clan members in the secret realm, and the alarm immediately sounded. When the elders in the secret realm received the news and confirmed that the rioters were members of the family, they immediately rushed over in an aggressive manner. Impudent, the elders made up their minds. No matter who was right or wrong in this matter, they had to severely punish those intruders. If they didn't do this, their original prestige would be completely lost, and no one would listen to the Elder Council's manipulation. However, when he arrived at the battlefield, he found out that the Magi who had trespassed the secret plane were actually led by Mills. Such an unexpected situation had completely exceeded the expectations of the elders. "You damn guy, what are you doing?" An elder of the family immediately rebuked Mills when he saw the situation. He was furious. However, Mills looked at him with an indescribable coldness in her eyes. It was a gesture that she had never shown before. The elder's heart trembled slightly as he realized what had happened. In the blink of an eye, he revealed a cold smile. "Fine, don't tell me you want to rebel and disobey the family's orders." Before he could finish his sentence, Mills pointed at him, the hatred in his eyes as sharp as a blade. "You shut up. My loyalty to the family is not something trash like you can compare to. Even now, I've always been the same, thinking about how to preserve the family. Unlike you, a bunch of greedy, selfish, and self-centered people who only want to sacrifice the interests of your people in exchange for your stability. In addition, I have to remind you that the clan's orders and your orders are completely different." Hearing Mills sneer, the elder sneered, and a strong killing intent burst out. "The Elder Council's orders can't represent the family, what a ridiculous statement. Since you want to rebel, I can't let you live. You must die today." A terrifying killing intent enveloped them, causing them to feel a kind of terror. Looking at Mills, who was opposite him, he didn't panic at all. Instead, his expression was even more sarcastic. The existence of the family's Elder Council is for the development and glory of the family. Because they bear a heavy responsibility, they must have a more sacrificial spirit than ordinary family members. But you bunch of bastards, each and every one of you is selfish and afraid of death. You only want to sell out your family members in exchange for your safety. Beasts like you should all be killed. You don't have the right to live." Mills was almost roaring as he said the words that he had been holding back for a long time. At this moment, his body was surrounded by black gas, and his robe and hair fluttered even though there was no wind. An aura was slowly spreading and rising. "It seems like you're really tired of living. In that case, I'll burn your bones and scatter your ashes." The elder's face was dark. He cackled and attacked without any hesitation. He had absolute confidence that he could kill Mills. However, just as the attack was about to land and everything was about to be settled, the sneering Mills' aura suddenly changed. An extremely terrifying aura erupted from his body. "Sorcerer God, how is this possible?" The elder's expression changed drastically, and he let out a scream. He felt the danger of death approaching. Boom! A huge hand descended from the sky and slapped the elder's body, turning him into ashes in an instant. Chapter 3654. Don't leave a single one behind. The moment the sorcerer god's aura appeared, the clan elders hiding in the secret realm instantly felt a terrifying pressure. They couldn't believe that such a terrifying aura had come from Mills. "This is impossible." The few elders who were charging at Mills stopped in their tracks, their faces filled with fear and bewilderment. However, the fact was that this family star, who was used by them as a shield, did have the power of a supreme magus. No matter where the power came from, it was not something they could resist. The elders' thoughts were to escape as soon as possible. In the face of such an undefeatable and terrifying power, staying would only be courting death. Before they could do anything, Mills had already launched an attack, determined not to let the enemy escape. Roar! Mills, who had the power of a god, almost lost himself in this powerful power. Fortunately, he returned to normal in an instant. At this moment, the entire secret realm was under his control. There was not a single place that he missed. In this special small world, he was the true controller, with the power of the creator. The surprised and overjoyed Mills immediately used his authority. Secret realm, seal. With the order, the entrance to the secret plane was actually closed. This was something that had never happened before. The enemies who were trying to escape were completely dumbfounded. They looked at Mills in despair. They were like beasts trapped in a cage, with no way to escape. At the same time, they had to fight against an enemy they couldn't fight against. The feeling of despair and collapse surged like a wave. Why is it like this? Why did he get the control of the secret plane? The family's great elder was filled with unwillingness. He didn't think that the control of the secret plane that he had dreamed of would fall into Mills' hands just like that. They were both pure-blood descendants of the family, so why was it so unfair to give the authority to the traitor Mills? Compared to the great elder's unwillingness, Mills had a hint of understanding in his heart. The figure of the family's ancestor flashed before his eyes. The great ancestor might have anticipated this day, so he had arranged everything in advance. It was obviously to help Mills suppress these unfilial rebellions, and at the same time, to have the capital to rise again. The most valuable things in the family were in this secret realm. This was also the main reason why the elders of the family were unwilling to leave. When Mills thought of this, he was suddenly filled with pride. I, Mills, swear with my soul that I won't let down the ancestors' trust. I'll let the family return to the peak of glory. Along with the heroic oath, Mills used the power of the gods and the authority given to him by the secret realm, suppress, destroy, and completely purify the shame of these families. An indescribable terror instantly descended upon the entire mystic realm, causing everyone to feel an indescribable sense of fear. The elders, who had tried to attack Mills but were shocked by his current performance, all burst out in howls of despair. Don't stop, you're the real traitor. You actually want to kill an elder of the same clan. How is this possible? Why would the ancestor be so biased and give the authority of the secret realm to this beast? I regret it so much. If I had known this day would come, I would have killed you back then. However, no matter how many words they said, they could not fight against the arrival of death. Under the suppression of the rule power, the enemies in the secret plane disintegrated one after another. As far as the eye could see, there was a bloody mist everywhere, causing the secret realm to be filled with corpses. Even with the secret technique of rebirth, the pieces of flesh and remains wriggled and gathered like maggots, but they could not go against the rules of the secret realm. Under the burning fire, it finally turned into a handful of dust. At this moment, the secret realm was filled with wails, hopelessness, and curses. From the moment Mills made his move, he had already made up his mind to not let any of his enemies off. These were all the scum of the family, and they deserved to be killed and cleaned up. Even if it would hurt their bones, they had to get rid of these cancer. Otherwise, if he was allowed to stay, his family would definitely be destroyed. At this time, Mills had targeted the family elders again. He wanted to kill these culprits in the end. Seeing their descendants wailing and exploding into meat paste, the elders of the family were disheartened. Facing the sorcerer god's terrifying power and the suppression of the secret realm's rules, they had no power to resist at all. Originally, they thought that after occupying the secret plane, they would be able to rest easy. Who would have thought that he'd be caught in his own trap? What was originally the best shelter had now become a burial ground. I'm not willing to accept this, Yingluo, an elder of the family, roared and tried to resist the power of rules, but he was still crushed and turned into a cloud of dust. If you do this, you won't have a good death, and you won't have a good ending either. There were also elders who tried to curse Mills before they died, but they only got a mocking smile in return. As long as it's for the clan, I'll die without regrets. I'm not like you, a bunch of cowardly dogs who will be spurned even after death. With the sorcerer god's power, Millie's heart was as hard as steel, unmoved by any words. Spare my life. I'm willing to sign a contract and be at your beck and call. At the same time, there were also elders who could not withstand the threat of death and begged for mercy. However, from the beginning to the end, he did not receive any response. He only saw Mills' cold and heartless smile. He was like a god who was high above, watching the ants struggle. He had never treated them as his own kind. The magi who had followed Mills and were prepared for a bloody battle were now silent. They had never thought that war would be like this. The enemy that they had thought was extremely powerful was actually killed in such a crushing manner. They did not even have the power to fight back. Magi were absolutely rational, selfish, and emotionless, but they had a high sense of identity with their families. Their noble and pure background allowed them to obtain a considerable amount of help in the process of cultivation. Now that he had witnessed the massacre of his own kind, he had an indescribable feeling in his heart. It wasn't sorrow, nor was it gloating, much less the kind of excitement and carefreeness one would feel after killing an enemy and obtaining victory. But at this moment, Millie's voice rang out. I know that all of you may blame yourselves for not being able to save these familiar faces. However, I want to say that they are not worthy of being of the same race as you. When the clan was in danger, he only thought about escaping and didn't consider how to solve the crisis at all. Using his own kind as a pawn to help him block the threat from the enemy, he had no sense of friendship at all. How can such a cowardly and shameless bastard be worthy of being of your race? Compared to you guys who are willing to give up everything and fight to the death with the enemy, they are worse than dirt on the soles of their shoes. Mill's words had the power to rouse the hearts of the people, waking up the bewildered followers. They cheered loudly, celebrating this rare complete victory. At the same time, the last enemy turned into dust. The secret realm was completely under his control. Mills sighed softly, and the terrifying power slowly receded, finally returning to its original state. The huge difference in strength made Mills feel lost. He finally realized how weak he was. Thinking of the sorcerer god's power and the ancestors' great glory, Mills had already made up his mind. No matter what price he had to pay, he had to improve his strength so that he would no longer be at the mercy of others. In the current Magus world, there was no such opportunity. The enemy would spare no effort to suppress them, and it was impossible for Mills' family to rise again. Once that happened, the calamity that the Mills family had suffered would befall them. And it was even crueler, not giving him any chance to breathe. Pass on my order. All the elite disciples of the family are to enter the secret realm. By opening the clan's treasury, as long as there was a need, they could receive cultivation resources without restriction. All the members of the clan must gather at the ancestral land within the time limit. Once the time limit is exceeded, they are not allowed to enter again. As Mills said this, a hint of madness flashed in his eyes. When the right opportunity comes, I'll lead all of you to vent your anger to your heart's content. Then, we'll start a new chapter for the Mills family. Chapter 3655. The game of chess before departure. Tang Zhen had already received the news when Mills used the power of the gods in Wan. What Mills did not know was that there were also spies from the super mall beside him. After the opening of the super mall, the infiltration of the Magus world was far more serious than the mill phenomenon. Any changes in the Magus world would be sent to the super shopping center in a timely manner, and they would also be deployed in a timely manner. World of Lusheng, Super Shopping Mall. At this moment, Tang Zhen was sitting quietly under the glazed treasure tree and controlling the chess game. The person playing chess with him was his clone, who was previously in charge of guarding the sacred dragon battle zone. After the meeting, the avatar would head to the origin realm to start a new round of cultivation. The sacred dragon battlefront continued to be closed off from the outside world, quietly developing on its own. The doppelganger would use the secret technique provided by the main body. Since they came from the same source, their future achievements were worth looking forward to. If another godking were to appear, Tang Zhen would be even more confident. Those who harbored enmity towards Tang Zhen and harbored ill intentions would also cease their actions. After a cultivator reached a certain level, battles would not occur easily. It was just like how the countries in the mortal world mostly used their martial arts to intimidate others. Those countries that easily went to war were often small countries. The current situation was still not optimistic. It could be said that it was imperative to improve the strength of his clone. Slowly putting down a chess piece, the avatar smiled. He had a feeling that he was about to win. The game of chess between gods was by no means as simple as it seemed on the surface. It involved the operation of rules. A chess piece in the hand was by no means placed wherever it wanted. It was the same for the chessboard. It was not as simple as people thought, but a world created by divine power. The heaven and earth were the chessboard, and all living beings were the chess pieces. As for the gods high above, they were naturally the players who controlled the chessboard. Sometimes, a game of chess would even take hundreds of thousands of years to reach the final outcome. This chess game was very profound, but it was also very simple. As long as one was a god, they would have the right to play chess. There was no difference between a god king and a god general. After all, this kind of game was only a competition of wisdom and the layout of rules. It had little to do with one's strength. It was not strange for a divine general to defeat a divine king expert in the process of a battle. Of course, most of the divine generals did not have the chance to compete with a divine king. After all, the difference between the two was too great. To a divine general, playing chess with a divine king was actually a kind of cultivation that they could not ask. Please like and share the video on the YouTube channel Cultivation Audiobooks. For more, it could allow them to benefit greatly. After winning the chess game, one could also get a reward. In addition to the bet agreed on by both sides, one could also get this evolved chess world. After some development, the chess world was already close to perfection and could be considered a high-level divine weapon. It could be used as a secret realm and produce a large number of divine servants. In short, it had all kinds of wonderful functions. Such a special prize would still have a certain level of attraction even to a god king. There were even some shocking chess games where many gods would participate in them. They would display their magical abilities to obtain the final victory. That kind of heaven and earth chess game was truly exciting. All kinds of creatures participated in it and killed each other non-stop. Tang Zhen laughed softly when he saw that the situation was gradually becoming clear. After which, he placed another chess piece. The chess piece fell without a sound and seemed ordinary, but the avatar's expression changed slightly. After a moment of silence, he chuckled and shook his head. As expected, I'm still lacking by one move. Although it was far from the end, the divine spirit's deduction ability was extremely terrifying, and the clone had already vaguely calculated the changes that would happen next. A seemingly insignificant setup could possibly turn the entire situation around and lead to an unexpected result. In simple words, it was a failure. Tang Zhen shook his head when he heard the sigh of the clone. He did not agree with the clone's words. We can't decide the outcome of the battle without reaching the last step. The small chess piece seems to be able to turn the situation around, but in fact, it can't withstand much wind and rain at all. It would be fine if he ignored it. If there was a little room for growth, there was also the possibility of becoming successful. However, if they were discovered, would they allow it to grow and eventually become a great threat? Although they came from the same source, there were differences between the main body and the avatar, which could be seen through the judgment of the chess game. The avatar shook his head. He clearly knew this, but he had his own thoughts. So what if they did? The operation of this chess game is ever-changing, and the players also need to follow the rules. There were many times when one could only allow it to develop even if they knew the disadvantages existed. By the time they tried to remedy the situation, it might already be too late, and it might even lead to more changes. One wrong step and he would lose step by step, and in the end, he would lose everything. The chess game of mortals and the manipulation and evolution of gods are actually the same principle. The game of chess between the two sides was back and forth, neither side giving in to the other, and this game of chess was far from over. It's about time. Why don't we put this game on hold? As the clone spoke, he had already stood up. Tang Zhen also stood up and said to his clone, when you go to the origin realm, you must be wary of the other territories. They may take advantage of my attack on the sorcerer world and launch a sudden attack in the origin realm. To the enemy, this is an excellent opportunity to act. They definitely won't miss it. Tang Zhen's expression was extremely solemn when he spoke of this matter. A cold glint flickered in his eyes. These guys have been hostile to the cracked territory since the beginning. Even though I've become a god king, they're still not giving up. Since the other party doesn't know what's good for them, then we'll play with them. The more fun we make today, the more miserable we'll lose in the future. The avatar nodded to show that he understood. In fact, his main task was to guard the giant city of the origin realm. With the avatar and the divine servants sent by Tang Zhen, it shouldn't be a problem to defend the giant city. Both Black Mist and Vajra were super strong, enough to intimidate anyone in the origin realm. In addition to Tang Zhen's various arrangements, if the enemy launched an attack, it was very likely that they would suffer heavy losses. Of course, the premise of all this was that the Divine King experts would not make a move. Once a God King was involved, it would be almost impossible to defend the giant city. This kind of situation was very rare. Once the God Kings joined the war, it was equivalent to completely shedding all pretenses of cordiality. As long as he could confirm the other party's identity, Tang Zhen did not need to say any nonsense. He could directly start a war in the Tower World. Although the giant city was far away in the origin realm, it was also an overseas territory of the cracked territory. It could not be easily offended. As cultivators of Lu City, they shouldn't hit a man when he was down overseas, as that would be breaking the law. If he really dared to do this, it would be equivalent to declaring war. Tang Zhen had every reason to start a war. This also allowed Tang Zhen to confirm that even if the giant city encountered danger, it would definitely be within an acceptable range. If it was really a fatal crisis, Tang Zhen would rather give up this overseas territory of the giant city than let his avatar take the risk. In the process of their conversation, they also mentioned the layout of the sorcerer world. Using the sorcerer world as a target to reverse the terrible situation in the cracked territory was the best choice. If the operation was successful, they would be able to take revenge for the war zone invasion and deal a serious blow to the sorcerer's world. If the operation failed, there would be no losses. With the world of Lusheng as his backing, he didn't need to worry about a way out. If he couldn't win, he could just run away. The two powerful plane worlds would definitely not start a war with unknown results because of this friction. The Cornerstone platform was also very supportive of Tang Zhen. They tried to determine the true strength of the wizard world through this confrontation. Chapter 3656, Preparations before the operation. 1. The Wizard World, the Mills family's ancestral land. With the secret order, the Magi who still had hope in their families and were willing to follow Mills gathered in the ancestral land. An emergency gathering in such a state could be said to be abandoning everything. There were no good banquets, and there were no good meetings. In troubled times, such behavior was often linked to danger. Before the Magi arrived, they had already mentally prepared themselves. Not all Magi in the family were willing to help each other in times of danger. After receiving the order, they gave various reasons. It was only to show one thing, and that was that they could not gather on time. Mills didn't care about such a reply at all. He had already expected such a thing to happen. He only wanted sincere followers and to complete great things with him. He did not need those wavering guys. Their existence was a problem. A large group of Magi had gathered in a certain area of the ancestral land and were carrying out a special mission. The items obtained from the superstore were being pieced together by the wizards, and the general shape was already revealed. It looked like a wizard tower, but there were many differences. Its real purpose was not for wizards to experiment and practice. The wizards who took part in the mission were all knowledgeable. Even if they didn't say it clearly, they could already guess what it was used for. This was a special teleportation array that could teleport across planes. Its design could be said to be ingenious. There were too many things that they could not understand at all. The Magi participating in the mission had never seen a similar teleportation circle before, so they were naturally filled with curiosity and shock. The Magi already had a rough idea of Mills's plan. Other than feeling helpless and emotional, they also felt a sense of relief. If he really couldn't resist, choosing to escape was not a bad idea. As long as the family's roots were still there, they could slowly wait for an opportunity to rise up again. To these Magi, the act of retreating was not shameful. If they knew that they were no match for the enemy and chose to face it head-on, that would be the true stupidity. What the Magi were most curious about was that the teleportation formation came from that world, so why had they never come into contact with it before? On the list of guesses, the world of Lusheng was at the top. The wizards did not know much about the world of Lusheng, so they could not make more accurate judgments. However, he had a lot of knowledge about the Super Mall, and many Magi had welcome tokens in their hands. The wizards were full of anticipation when they thought about the world of Lusheng. They did not care where they were going, they only cared if their curiosity was satisfied. The world of Lusheng was mysterious and powerful, and it was extremely attractive to these curious Magi. Even without the family's crisis, if they were offered a chance to go to the world of Lusheng, these wizards would definitely go. In the process of construction, the Magi were also constantly learning. Every time they saw an exquisite part, they could not help but exclaim in admiration. The outer area of the teleportation formation had been tightly sealed, which could prevent any detection methods. One of the divine weapons was personally crafted by Tang Zhen. It could block the detection of a god king. The ancestors of the sorcerer world were equivalent to the level of god kings. They incarnated as the stars in the sky, controlling and maintaining different law attributes. The primogenitor star was revolving around the sorcerer world. It was moving silently, and not a single area was left out. Every day, there would be a constellation on duty, and on that day, the law attributes would be strengthened. These Star Dawn Magi were in charge of maintaining the operation of the laws, as well as monitoring and investigating the Magus world. If the teleportation array was not properly concealed, it was very likely that it would be discovered by the other party. The sorcerer world was different from the world of Lusheng. It was not in a closed state, and the teleportation circle would be actively open to other worlds. This was similar to the Myriad World Mall, but it was obviously not as open as the other party, and most of them were only connected to occupied areas. In the Magus world, the number of teleportation arrays was uncountable, and the construction of teleportation arrays was also allowed. However, if it was connected to an unknown area, such as the teleportation formation of the world of Lusheng, it would definitely alert these patrolling stars. Due to their special identities, they might not take action personally, but they would definitely send a special envoy to investigate the matter. The Ring Masters didn't dare to ignore the orders given by the primogenitor star. They would deal with them immediately. If that happened, Millie's plan would not be able to be carried out, and it would be a fatal blow. It was very important to effectively cover up his traces and not be discovered by the primogenitor star in the sky. If an ordinary god were to make a move, they might be able to cover up their traces, but the chances of them being exposed would be higher. Because of his lack of skill, it might lead to him trying to hide something, which might make it easier for him to expose himself. However, the situation would be completely different if it was Tang Zhen who took action. He had specially made it to help him hide the traces of the teleportation formation and deal with the cursory inspection of the primogenitor star. There was no need to doubt Tang Zhen's attainments in formations. If he were to personally help to hide, the chances of the teleportation formation being discovered were extremely low. Tang Zhen didn't say it clearly, and Mills was also clueless. He didn't know how precious this divine weapon was. Although Tang Zhen had promised that the teleportation formation would not be discovered by anyone, he still felt uneasy. This was a huge taboo. Once the secret was exposed, the consequences would be unimaginable. When that time came, the sorcerer world would issue an order to kill without the need for the enemy to attack. Any wizard had the right to kill a member of the Mills family and get the corresponding reward. The enemies who had surrounded and killed the Mills family could then go from the light to the dark and launch an attack in the open. At that time, Mills would not have any chance at all. Even if he used all his strength, he would still be unable to escape death. It was because of this worry that Mills was extremely careful when he did things, and he did not dare to make any mistakes. In the process of planning and preparation, Mills often entered the super mall. On one hand, it was to report the progress of the matter, and on the other hand, it was to collect aid. His family was already in a difficult situation. After a round of elimination, their high-end combat power had suffered serious losses. Other than Mills, only 1/5 of the high-level wizards were left. This was a fatal blow. Under such circumstances, wanting to engage in a battle with the enemy was practically an act of courting death. It was like a mouse ambushing a lion. Even though it had all sorts of advantages and succeeded, the damage it could cause was limited. On the other hand, a lion that was ambushed only needed to grab and bite to crush the mouse. In the face of this difficult situation, Mills could only turn to Tang Zhen for help. There was no other way. In fact, from the beginning, Mills had no other choice. It was only because of Tang Zhen's appearance that he had a new choice. Although every step he took now seemed difficult, Mills was extremely determined. He knew that although the road ahead was dark and confusing, he had already left the vortex that was about to devour his family. Even though there was no light at the end of the darkness, Mills still had no regrets. Fortunately, he was able to obtain all kinds of surprises every time he met Tang Zhen. His confused state of mind was also constantly being reversed. He became more and more confident, and even a little impatient. He had once asked Tang Zhen when he would officially start the operation. In the end, Tang Zhen let him make his own decision. The superstore was only responsible for providing information and the necessary materials for various operations. It would never give orders during the operation. Mills was a little touched by Tang Zhen's deferment of power, but there was also a trace of fear. The fear in his heart became even stronger when he saw the information that Tang Zhen had provided. He suddenly realized that he was not commanding a family war, but a riot in the Ring district that had an even wider range.